The crystal vase shattered before Elena Rossi could catch it. Time slowed as the antique piece 18th century Venetian glass, Mrs. Victoria Blackwell had mentioned at least 40 times, tumbled from the marble side table. Elena's hand shot out, fingers grasping at air, but gravity was faster. The vase hit the imported Italian tile with a sound like a gunshot, exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces that scattered across the foyer of the Blackwell mansion. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. For 3 seconds, Elena couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, her cleaning cloth still clutched in her trembling hand, staring at the destruction spreading across the floor like a crime scene. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught each shard, turning them into tiny mirrors that reflected her own horrified face back at her 100 times over. No, 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 no. Elena dropped to her knees immediately, her 52-year-old joints protesting as they hit the hard floor. Her hands moved frantically, trying to gather the pieces as if somehow she could put them back together, as if she could rewind the last 10 seconds and catch the vase this time. Please, she whispered to no one. To God maybe, to whatever force controlled the universe, and decided when humble women like her got a break. Please, not today. Her fingers found the larger pieces first. The base was mostly intact, the intricate gold leaf pattern still visible. Maybe she could glue it. Maybe if she worked carefully, stayed late, used her own money to buy supplies. What was that noise? Victoria Blackwell's voice cut through Elena's desperate thoughts like a blade. Sharp, cultured, dripping with the kind of authority that came from generations of wealth and the absolute certainty that the world existed to serve her. Elena's head snapped up. Her employer stood at the top of the curved staircase, one perfectly manicured hand on the banister, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that Elena knew was Chanel because she'd picked it up from the dry cleaners last Tuesday. Mrs. Blackwell, I'm so sorry. Elena started, but Victoria was already descending the stairs, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of an execution march. Is that my Venetian vase? Victoria's voice had gone quiet, dangerously quiet. It was an accident, ma'am. I was dusting the table and my elbow caught. Do you have any idea what that piece was worth? Victoria reached the bottom of the stairs, and Elena could see her face now. Flushed red with rage, eyes narrowed to slits, jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped. That vase has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandmother brought it from Venice in 1923. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pieces she'd gathered. Mrs. Blackwell, please. I'll pay for it. I can work extra hours. No pay. Whatever you need. Pay for it? Victoria laughed, a brittle sound that echoed through the cavernous foyer. That vase was appraised at $45,000. Do you even make that in a year? Elena's stomach dropped. $45,000. She made $32,000 a year cleaning houses, and most of that went to rent on her tiny studio apartment in Queens and the medications she could barely afford. She'd been saving for 3 years and had almost $8,000 hidden in a coffee can under her bathroom sink. Money for emergencies, for the day she finally couldn't work anymore, for it didn't matter. $8,000 wouldn't even cover 1/5 of the damage. I'll find a way, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was still on her knees, surrounded by broken glass, looking up at a woman who probably spent $45,000 on a single shopping trip without thinking twice. Please, Mrs. Blackwell, I need this job. I can't afford to lose it. Victoria stared down at her, and for a moment, Elena thought she saw something flicker across her employer's face. Not sympathy exactly, but maybe recognition. Recognition that she held all the power in this moment, that one woman's entire livelihood balanced on her whim. Then, the moment passed. Get up, Victoria said coldly. You're bleeding on my floor. Elena looked down and realized blood was indeed dripping from her right palm, where a shard had cut deep into the flesh. She hadn't even felt it, too consumed by fear and desperation. The blood was mixing with the fragments of glass, dark red against crystal clear. Another mess she'd have to clean. I'm sorry, Elena whispered again, pressing her bleeding hand against her cleaning apron, the plain gray one Victoria insisted all the staff wear, nothing that might stand out or offend the aesthetic of the pristine mansion. She stood slowly, her knees aching, her hand throbbing, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Victoria circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "You've worked for me for how long now?" 3 years, ma'am. 3 years. Victoria stopped directly in front of her. "And in those 3 years, have I not been more than fair? Have I not paid you on time? Given you a full day's work when other families cut back their staff?" "Yes, ma'am. You've been very—" "Then explain to me." Victoria's voice rose, the composure cracking. "Why you repay that generosity by destroying an irreplaceable family heirloom?" "It was an accident. Accidents happen when people are careless." Victoria was shouting now, her face inches from Elena's. "When they don't pay attention. When they're too distracted thinking about God knows what instead of focusing on their work." Elena flinched but held, her ground. She wanted to explain that she'd been distracted because her arthritis had been acting up all morning, making her hands stiff and clumsy. That she was tired from working 3 houses today. That she'd skipped lunch to make it here on time. That her prescription medication had run out last week, and she couldn't afford the refill until her next paycheck. But none of that mattered. Not to Victoria Blackwell, who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd inherited her fortune and her mansion and her precious Venetian vase, and probably never worried about anything more serious than which charity gala to attend. "I'll clean this up," Elena said quietly, defeated, "and then I'll go." She bent to gather the glass again, but Victoria's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, not gently. The perfectly manicured fingers dug into Elena's skin with surprising strength, making the older woman gasp in pain. "You'll clean it up," Victoria said through gritted teeth, "and then we're going to have a very serious conversation about your future employment. And your debt." Elena's blood ran cold. Debt. The word hung in the air like a noose. "Mrs. Blackwell, please. 3 years of loyal service," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And this is how it ends. With you on your knees, surrounded by the pieces of something you could never afford to replace, begging for mercy." The cruelty in those words hit Elena harder than a physical blow. Because Victoria was right. This was exactly how it would end. This was how it always ended for women like her, invisible until they made a mistake, then suddenly very visible and very disposable. Elena had spent her entire life on her knees, scrubbing floors, cleaning toilets, picking up after people who never learned her last name. She'd raised a son alone after her husband died, worked herself to exhaustion to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. She'd sacrificed everything, her health, her youth, her dreams, so her boy could have a chance at something better. And now, at 52 years old, with arthritis in her hands and a bad knee and nothing saved for retirement, she was going to lose everything over a vase. Victoria released her wrist and stepped back, brushing invisible dirt from her Chanel suit. "Clean this up, all of it, and when you're finished, come find me in my office. We'll discuss the terms of your repayment." She turned and walked away, heels clicking against marble, leaving Elena alone in the foyer surrounded by $45,000 worth of broken glass and broken dreams. Elena's hands trembled as she worked, carefully gathering each piece, wrapping them in newspaper she'd fetched from the recycling bin. Her cut palm stung, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was the number. $45,000. Even if Victoria allowed her to pay it back in installments, it would take years. Decades, maybe. She'd be working for this woman until she died, trapped in servitude by one moment of clumsiness. Outside the tall windows, New York City gleamed in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, in that vast urban sprawl, her son was living his life. She hadn't seen him in almost 8 years. Not since he'd left at 23, promising he'd make something of himself, promising he'd come back for her once he'd built something real. He'd stopped calling 4 years ago. The letters had stopped 6 months after that. Elena told herself he was busy, that he'd found success and gotten caught up in his new life. She told herself he hadn't forgotten about his mother, that he still thought about the woman who'd raised him alone, who'd loved him fiercely even when everything else fell apart. But late at night, in her tiny studio apartment, she let herself wonder if maybe he was ashamed of where he came from. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Of the mother who cleaned houses for a living, who smelled like cleaning chemicals and had calluses on her hands and couldn't afford nice things. A sob caught in Elena's throat, but she swallowed it down. No crying. Not here. not where Victoria might see and take even more pleasure in her pain. She finished gathering the glass and carried it to the kitchen, her movements automatic after 3 years of working in this house. The kitchen was enormous, all gleaming stainless steel and white marble, bigger than her entire apartment. She disposed of the glass carefully, wrapped tight so no one would cut themselves on it. Then she washed her hands, wincing as water hit the cut on her palm. She should bandage it, but that would mean asking Victoria for supplies, and Elena couldn't bring herself to ask for anything else today. Instead, she pressed a clean dish towel against it until the bleeding slowed, then wrapped it tight and tucked it under her sleeve. "Elena." Victoria's voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the mansion. "My office, now." Elena closed her eyes, sent up one more desperate prayer to a god who probably wasn't listening, and walked toward her judgment. Victoria Blackwell's home office was designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that had probably never been read, and an enormous desk that looked like it belonged to a Fortune 500 CEO. Which, Elena supposed, it might have Victoria's late husband had been something in finance before he'd died and left her everything. Elena stood in front of that desk now, hands clasped in front of her, head slightly bowed. The position of a supplicant, a servant. Exactly what Victoria wanted. "Sit," Victoria commanded, gesturing to one of the uncomfortable-looking chairs across from her desk. Elena sat, perching on the edge of the seat, her spine straight. She'd never been invited to sit in this office before. The formality of it made her stomach churn with fresh anxiety. Victoria settled into her executive chair with the air of a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. She pulled out a blithe, leather-bound ledger who even kept physical ledgers anymore, and made a show of flipping through pages. "Let's discuss your options," Victoria said, her voice all business now. The rage had cooled into something worse, calculated cruelty. The vase was appraised at $45,000 3 years ago. Given its age and provenance, its current value is likely closer to $50,000. However, I'm willing to be reasonable. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. Reasonable. The word tasted like ashes. "I'll allow you to repay the debt at $45,000, Victoria continued. "You currently make $32,000 a year working for me 2 days a week. If you agree to work 5 days a week at the same rate." "5 days?" Elena's voice cracked. "Mrs. Blackwell, I work for other families." "You worked for other families," Victoria corrected coldly. "Going forward, you'll work exclusively for me until the debt is repaid. 5 days a week, same hourly rate, no outside employment." The room tilted. Elena gripped the arms of her chair, trying to steady herself. "I can't survive on 2 days' pay spread across 5 days. The rent alone, that's not my concern." Victoria's expression was ice. "You destroyed my property. These are the consequences." But that would mean Elena did the math in her head, her heart sinking with each calculation. 2 days' pay was roughly $1,200 a month. Her rent was $1,100. That left $100 for food, medications, utilities, everything else. "I can't live on that." "Then I suggest you find cheaper accommodation." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Or perhaps you'd prefer I call the police? Report the destruction of property? File a claim with my insurance company that would undoubtedly want to pursue damages from you directly?" Elena's blood turned to ice. "The police? What you did constitutes criminal negligence," Victoria said smoothly. "Destruction of property over $25,000 is a felony in New York. You could face prison time. It was a bluff. It had to be. People didn't go to prison for accidentally breaking a vase." But Elena wasn't educated in the law. She didn't know what was real and what was manipulation. All she knew was that Victoria Blackwell had money and power and connections, and Elena had nothing. "Please," Elena whispered. "There must be another way." "There is." Victoria pulled out a piece of paper. "A contract, already prepared. Sign this. Agree to the terms. 5 days a week, same hourly rate, all payments go toward your debt until it's repaid in full. I calculate that will take approximately 3.5 years, assuming no further incidents. 3.5 years, Elena would be 56 by then. Her hands would be worse, her back would give out, and she'd have nothing saved. She'd be trapped in a cycle of servitude until she physically couldn't work anymore. And then what? She'd end up on the streets, another invisible old woman society had used up and thrown away. "And if I don't sign?" Elena asked. though she already knew the answer. Victoria smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Then I make a phone call. The police come. You're arrested for criminal negligence, possibly prosecuted for felony destruction of property. Even if you avoid prison, you'll have a record. Good luck finding employment after that. The trap was perfect. Sign away years of her life in servitude, or risk losing everything and ending up with nothing anyway. Elena's hand trembled as she reached for the pen Victoria offered. She thought about her son, wherever he was, whatever he'd become. She thought about the little boy who used to climb into her lap after she came home exhausted from work, who'd hug her tight and tell her she smelled like lemons and love. She thought about the young man who'd promised to come back for her, to build something better, to make sure she never had to scrub another floor. She thought about how much time had passed since she'd heard his voice. Sign on the bottom line, Victoria instructed. Initial each page. Elena touched pen to paper. The ink was black, stark against white. Each stroke felt like signing away a piece of her soul. Page 1 initial. Page 2 initial. Page 3. The front door burst open with a crash that echoed through the entire mansion. Both women froze. Victoria's head snapped toward the doorway. Elena's hand stilled, pen hovering over the third page. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer. Multiple sets, moving fast, purposeful. The sound of men who weren't asking permission to enter. What on earth? Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against hardwood. A man appeared in the office doorway, and Elena's breath caught. He was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders filling out an obviously expensive black suit. Dark hair slicked back from a face that was all sharp angles and harder edges. He couldn't have been more than 31, 32. But he moved with the kind of confidence that came from absolute power, from being feared. But it was his eyes that made Elena's heart stop. Dark brown, almost black, intense in a way that made the air feel thinner. Eyes she'd know anywhere, even though the last time she'd seen them, they'd belonged to a 23-year-old kid who'd kissed her goodbye and promised he'd be back soon. Marco? The name escaped Elena's lips as barely a whisper. The man's gaze had been fixed on Victoria with predatory focus, but at the sound of Elena's voice, his entire body went rigid. Slowly, so slowly, he turned his head. Their eyes met. For one heartbeat, 2, 3, the world stopped spinning. Elena watched recognition flash across her son's face. Her baby boy, who'd grown into this dangerous stranger, followed by shock, confusion, and then something darker. Something that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Mama? Marco's voice was different than she remembered. Deeper, rougher, with an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. But underneath, she could still hear the boy he'd been. What are you doing here? Behind him, 3 more men filed into the office. Large men in dark suits with the kind of stillness that came from violence held in check. Guards, Elena realized. Her son had guards. Victoria had gone pale. You're Elena's son? Marco ignored her, his eyes locked on Elena, on the pen still clutched in her trembling hand. On the contract spread across Victoria's desk. On the way, Elena was sitting spine straight, hands folded, head slightly bowed in the position of someone who'd been broken down and taught to make herself small. What? Marco said, his voice deadly quiet. Is happening here? Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. How could she explain? Where would she even start? Victoria, recovering some of her composure, stepped forward. Mr. Rossi, I presume? Your mother works for me. We're simply discussing terms of... I asked her. Marco's tone could have cut glass. Mama, what's going on? Elena looked at her son, this man she barely recognized, who commanded a room full of dangerous men, who wore power like armor and felt shame burn through her. He'd built something, clearly. Whatever life he'd made in the 8 years since she'd seen him, it was successful, important, powerful. And here she was, caught in the act of signing away years of her life because she'd broken a vase. I had an accident, Elena said quietly. Broke something valuable. Mrs. Blackwell and I were discussing repayment. Marco's jaw clenched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Repayment. A Venetian vase, Victoria interjected, seeming to regain confidence now that the initial shock had passed. 18th century, appraised at $45,000. Your mother agreed to work off the debt over, show me the contract. It wasn't a request. Marco moved forward with a predator's grace, and Victoria, actually stumbled back a step. One of Marco's guards smoothly intercepted the movement, plucking the papers from Victoria's desk before she could react. Marco took the contract, his eyes scanning the pages with sharp intelligence. Elena watched his face darken with each line he read. His hands larger than she remembered, with scars across the knuckles that told stories she probably didn't want to know, tightened on the paper until it crumpled slightly. 5 days a week. Marco read aloud, his voice flat. Dangerous. Same hourly rate as 2 days. All payments toward debt. Estimated completion time 3.5 years. He looked up at Victoria. And if she doesn't sign? Victoria lifted her chin defiantly. Then I pursue legal action for criminal negligence and destruction of property. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the guards seemed to stop breathing. Then Marco smiled. It was the coldest, most terrifying expression Elena had ever seen on a human face. Criminal. Negligence, he repeated. For an accident. For destroying irreplaceable. How much is your house worth, Mrs. Blackwell? The question caught Victoria off guard. I'm sorry? Your house. Marco gestured around the office. This mansion. The property. What's it worth? 5 million? 10? I don't see how that's relevant. Humor me. The smile never wavered, but something in Marco's eyes promised violence if she didn't answer. The property is valued at approximately $12 million, Victoria said stiffly. 12 million. Marco nodded slowly. And you're threatening my mother, a woman who makes $32,000 a year, cleaning houses with felony charges over a $45,000 vase. She destroyed. Anne. Accident, Marco interrupted. You said it yourself. She had an accident. He took a step closer to Victoria, who instinctively backed up until she hit the bookshelf. Let me ask you something, Mrs. Blackwell. Have you ever worked a day in your life? Ever cleaned a toilet? Scrubbed a floor? Spent 14 hours on your feet until your back screamed and your hands bled? This is inappropriate. Answer the question. Victoria's face flushed red. No, Marco echoed. Because you've never had to. You inherited money, married money. Lived your entire life in mansions you didn't build, wearing clothes you didn't earn. His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. And when a woman who's worked herself to exhaustion for you for 3 years makes one mistake, you don't show mercy. You don't show compassion. You trap her in debt slavery and threaten her with prison. I have every right. You have no rights over my mother. The words came out like a death sentence. Marco moved faster than Elena could track, suddenly right in Victoria's face. None. Do you understand me? Victoria's composure finally shattered. Who the hell do you think you are? One of the guards, a man with salt and pepper hair and the build of a dade. Professional fighter let out a soft, incredulous laugh. Marco didn't answer. He just stared at Victoria until she started to tremble. Boss, the guard said quietly. She doesn't know. Apparently not. Marco stepped back, smoothing down his suit jacket with careful precision. Mrs. Victoria Blackwell. Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Marco Rossi. I run the Rossi family operations in New York. He paused. All of them. The blood drained from Victoria's face. The Rossi family. You mean, Marco said softly, that I own more of this city than you can imagine. I control businesses, territories, people. I have connections that run from the mayor's office to the docks to every judge in the 5 boroughs. He smiled that terrible smile again. I'm the monster that powerful people whisper about in the dark, and you just tried to enslave my mother. Elena's legs gave out. She sank back into the chair, her mind reeling. The Rossi family. She'd heard that name. Everyone in New York had heard that name. They were, oh God. Her son was a Mafia boss. I didn't know, Victoria stammered. If I had known, if you had known, you would have treated her differently? Marco's voice turned razor sharp. Because of who her son is? Not because it was the right thing to do, but because you were afraid of consequences? Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Marco turned to one of his guards. Tony, find the vase, or what's left of it. The guard nodded and disappeared. Marco turned back to Victoria. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his tone conversational but his eyes promising death. My man is going to collect the broken vase. I'm going to have it professionally appraised by 3 independent experts. If it's truly worth $45,000, I'll write you a check today for the full amount. That's not necessary. Victoria started. It's extremely necessary. Marco's voice hardened. Because when my mother walks out of this house today, she's never coming back. You're going to pay her everything she's owed her regular wages, plus severance, plus a bonus for 3 years of loyal service. I calculate that at around $10,000. You have until end of business today to wire it to her account. Victoria's mouth fell open. 10,000. Oh, did I stutter? No, but, and Mrs. Blackwell? Marco leaned in close. If I hear you've breathed a word about filing police reports or insurance claims or anything else that might cause my mother distress, I'll make sure your life becomes very, very complicated. Your business investments? Audited. Your social circle? They'll hear interesting stories. This house? He tapped the wall. I own 3 buildings on this block. I could make your neighbors very interesting people. It was a threat delivered with surgical precision. Not violence that would be too crude, but the promise of complete destruction of everything Victoria valued: her reputation, her social standing, her comfortable life. Do we have an understanding? Marco asked. Victoria nodded, too terrified to speak. Good. Marco straightened, turning his back on her with the dismissive air of someone who no longer considered her a threat. His eyes found Elena's, and for a moment, the dangerous Mafia boss facade cracked. Underneath, she saw her boy. Scared, confused, desperate. Mama, he said softly, let's get you out of here. Elena stood on shaking legs. She wanted to run to him, to hug him, to slap him, to demand answers. But her body wouldn't cooperate. She just stood there, frozen. As her son, her baby boy, who'd become a monster that powerful people whispered about, approached her with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with how he'd just threatened Victoria Blackwell. Can you walk? Marco asked, his voice tender in a way that made Elena's eyes burn with tears. She nodded mutely. Then walk with me, Mama. We have a lot to talk about. Tony returned with a box containing the wrapped pieces of the vase. Marco took it without looking, handed it to another guard, and then so carefully, so gently took Elena's arm and guided her toward the door. They walked through the mansion Elena had cleaned for 3 years, past the foyer where she'd broken the vase, through the front door she'd entered through countless times as invisible help. But this time, she walked out on her son's arm, surrounded by guards who parted for them like water, leaving Victoria Blackwell standing alone in her perfect mansion with the ashes of her power crumbling around her. Outside, 3 black SUVs waited at the curb. More guards. More evidence of the life Marco had built. Which car is yours, Mama? Marco asked. Elena let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I take the subway. Something flickered across Marco's face. Pain, maybe. Or shame. Not anymore. Tony, take us to... He paused, looking at Elena. Where do you live? Queens. But Marco, you don't have to... Address, Mama. She gave it, her voice small and scared. They drove in silence through New York traffic. Elena sat beside her son in the back of the SUV, hyper-aware of the space between them. 8 years. 8 years of silence, of wondering, of lying to herself about why he never called. And now this revelation that he hadn't just succeeded, he'd become something she never imagined, something dangerous. The question hung unasked between them. What happened to you? But Elena was afraid she already knew the answer. Her sweet boy had found power the only way kids from their neighborhood could, through violence and crime, and becoming exactly the kind of man she'd tried so hard to protect him from. And somehow, impossibly, he'd become one of the most powerful men in New York. The question now was, what happened next? Elena's studio apartment looked even smaller with Marco standing in it. He'd insisted on walking her up him and 2 guards who now stood outside her door like sentinels. The building was old, the hallway dingy, the carpet stained and threadbare. Elena watched her son take it all in. The peeling paint, the flickering hallway light, the smell of cooking grease and mildew that never quite went away. His jaw tightened with each detail. This is where you've been living? Marco's voice was carefully controlled. Too controlled. It's affordable, Elena said, unlocking her door with hands that still trembled. And it's mine. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning. 1 room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room. A tiny kitchenette with appliances from the 70s. A bathroom she couldn't fully stand up in because of the slanted ceiling. 450 square feet of space that cost her $1,100 a month, because this was New York and nowhere was cheap. But it was clean. God, it was clean. Elena had spent her life cleaning other people's homes, and she'd be damned if her own place wasn't spotless. The Murphy bed was folded up into the wall. The small table by the window was clear, except for a single plant, a spider plant that somehow survived despite her erratic schedule. The floor was swept, the dishes were done, everything had its place. Because when you had almost nothing, you took care of what you had. Marco stood in the center of the room, and Elena saw him truly looking at his mother's life for the first time. The television from 2 decades ago that barely worked. The space heater because the building's heat was unreliable. The coffee can on top of the refrigerator that she thought he wouldn't notice, but he did. His eyes landed on it and stayed there for a long moment. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. 5 years. Elena set down her purse, wincing as her cut palm protested. She'd forgotten about it in the chaos. "It's fine, Marco, it's home. It's a closet." His voice cracked slightly. "Mama, this place is smaller than my bathroom. Well, some of us can't afford $12 million mansions." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with hurt and anger she'd been suppressing for 8 years. Marco flinched like she'd slapped him. "I didn't know. If I had known you were living like this, you would have what? Called? Visited?" Elena moved to the kitchenette, needing something to do with her hands. She filled the ancient kettle with water and set it on the stove. "You disappeared, Marco. 8 years. 8 years of nothing." "I had reasons. I'm sure you did." She kept her back to him, watching the kettle, willing it to boil faster. "Important reasons. Business reasons. Mafia reasons." The silence behind her was deafening. "How long have you known?" Marco asked quietly. "About what you do?" "I didn't. Not until today." Elena turned to face him. "But I'm not stupid, Marco. You show up with guards and expensive suits, threatening women in million-dollar homes like you own. The world. The Rossi family. I've heard that name. Everyone's heard that name. And now you're afraid of me." It wasn't a question. Marco's face had gone carefully blank, but his eyes showed everything. The fear that his own mother would look at him like everyone else did, with terror. Elena crossed the small space between them and did something she'd been wanting to do since he walked through Victoria Blackwell's door. She slapped him, not hard. She didn't have the strength to really hurt him, and her cut palm throbbed with the impact, but hard enough to make her point. "I am not afraid of you," she said fiercely. "You are my son, my baby boy. I changed your diapers. I held you when you had nightmares. I walked you to your first day of school." Her voice broke. "I don't care what you've become or how many people fear you. You are my son, and I am your mother. That doesn't change." Marco's composure shattered. His eyes went red-rimmed, his jaw trembled, and suddenly it wasn't a mafia boss anymore. He was just a boy who'd lost too much time with his mother. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Mama, I'm so sorry." "For what? For leaving? For not calling? For letting me think you forgot about me?" "All of it." Marco's hands clenched at his sides like he wanted to reach for her but didn't know if he was allowed. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I kept my distance, if I built my life separate from yours, you'd be safe. That what I was becoming wouldn't touch you." "Safe?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "I've been working myself to death for 8 years, wondering if you were alive. Telling myself you were just busy. Making excuses for why my son abandoned me." The tears came now, hot and angry. "Do you know how many times I've picked up the phone to call the police and report you missing? Do you know how many nights I've lain awake wondering if you were in jail or dead in an alley somewhere?" "I sent money," Marco said desperately. "Every month. $5,000. Didn't you get it?" Elena stared at him. "What money? I never received anything." Marco's face went very still, very dangerous. "What?" "Marco, I've received nothing from you in 8 years. No calls, no letters, no money. Nothing." She watched her son process this information, watched calculations run behind his eyes, watched rage build with careful precision. "Someone's been intercepting it," Marco said quietly. He pulled out his phone, typed rapidly. "Tony, I need you to find out what happened to the monthly payments I've been sending to my mother for the last 8 years. And find out who's been stealing from me." He hung up and looked at Elena with such raw pain that her anger wavered. "I've been sending you $5,000 every month," Marco said. $40,000. I thought you were receiving it. I thought you were living comfortably, that you'd quit cleaning houses, that you were—" He looked around the tiny apartment again. "God, Mama. How? Have you been surviving? The same way I always have? By working." Elena wiped at her tears with the back of her good hand. 3 different houses, 6 days a week. Sometimes 7 when I need extra. And today, at the Blackwells? Today I was tired. My arthritis was acting up. My prescription ran out because I can't afford the refill until next week. Elena's voice hardened. And I made a mistake. 1 mistake in 3 years of perfect service, and that woman was going to trap me in debt for the rest of my life. Marco's hands clenched into fists. If I had known, you would have what? Come charging in like you did today? Threatened her? Made her afraid? Elena stepped closer to him. Is that how you solve all your problems now, Marco? With threats and fear and violence? When necessary, yes. Marco met her eyes without flinching. The world isn't kind, Mama. You know that better than anyone. You've been beaten down by it your whole life. People like Victoria Blackwell look at people like us and see tools to be used and thrown away. So you became one of them. No. Marco's voice was fierce. I became strong enough that they can't hurt me. Or the people I love. If I'd known where you were, what you were going through, no one would have dared treat you that way. Victoria Blackwell would have tripped over herself to make sure you were comfortable. Because they're afraid of you. Yes. Elena studied her son's face. The sharp angles, the hard eyes, the jaw set with determination born from years of fighting for every inch of ground. He looked so different from the boy who'd left. But underneath, she could still see traces of the sweet child who used to help her fold laundry and tell her about his dreams. When your father died, Elena said quietly. You were 6 years old. Do you remember what I told you? Marco's expression softened slightly. You said he was watching over us, that he'd want us to be strong. I also said that strength isn't just about power. It's about character. It's about being kind when the world is cruel. About doing what's right even when it costs you. She touched his face gently, and he leaned into it like a child seeking comfort. Your father was strong, Marco, but he was also good. That's what made him a man worth mourning. Papa worked himself to death for pennies, Marco said, his voice rough with old grief. He was kind and good, and what did it get him? A heart attack at 43, leaving you alone with a kid to raise and bills you couldn't pay. Where's the reward for being good, Mama? Where's the justice? There isn't always justice, baby, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to be good people. I'm not good. Marco pulled away gently. I haven't been good in a very long time. I've done things. He stopped, shook his head. Things you shouldn't know about. Things that would make you ashamed of me. Are you a killer? Elena asked bluntly. Marco's silence was answer enough. Elena nodded slowly, processing this confirmation of what she'd already suspected. Did these people deserve it? That's a complicated question. No, it's not. Did they deserve it? Marco looked at her for a long moment. Some did. Some were threats that had to be eliminated. Some were lessons that needed to be taught. He paused. Some were probably just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The honesty of it gutted her. But Elena had spent 8 years imagining the worst. And the reality, while terrible, wasn't surprising. Boys from their neighborhood didn't become powerful without getting blood on their hands. I won't lie to you, Marco. I wish you'd chosen a different path. She sat down heavily at her small table, suddenly exhausted. But I'm your mother. I love you. That doesn't change just because you've done terrible things. Marco sank into the chair across from her. Up close, she could see new lines around his eyes, gray hairs at his temples that hadn't been there 8 years ago. He'd aged. This life had aged him. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Marco said. I know what I am, what I've become. But Mama, everything I've done, every choice I've made, it was to build something, to create a legacy, to make sure no one could ever hurt us again the way we were hurt when Papa died. And did it work? Are we safer now? Marco looked around the tiny apartment again. At the evidence of his mother living in poverty while he sent money that never arrived. At the life she'd been living while he built his empire in ignorance. No, he admitted quietly. I failed you. I thought I was protecting you by staying away, but all I did was abandon you when you needed me most. The kettle whistled. Elena stood, grateful for the distraction, and made 2 cups of tea with the cheap bags she bought in bulk. She set one in front of Marco, who stared at it like it was a foreign object. "When's the last time someone made you tea?" she asked. "I don't remember." They sat in silence, sipping tea in a cramped queen's apartment, while guards stood outside and New York hummed around them. Mother and son, separated by 8 years and choices that couldn't be unmade, but connected by bonds that violence and time couldn't sever. "What happens now?" Elena asked finally. "Now?" Marco set down his cup. "Now you're moving. Today, I'm not leaving you in this place another night. Marco, I have properties all over the city, Mama. Safe buildings with actual security and heat that works. You can choose anywhere you want. Manhattan, Brooklyn, somewhere with a doorman and elevators and rooms that don't double as your entire living space. I can't afford." "You're not paying." Marco's voice was firm. "The money I've been sending you for 8 years? Consider this back payment, and you're not cleaning houses anymore. Not for the Blackwells, not for anyone." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Elena asked. "Sit around in some fancy apartment being supported by mob money?" "Yes." Marco leaned forward. "Mama, you've worked your whole life. You've earned rest. Let me take care of you the way you took care of me." "I don't want mob money," Elena said quietly. "I don't want a life built on blood and violence." "Too late." Marco's voice was gentle but implacable. "Like it or not, I'm your son. Everything I have, everything I am, that's your legacy too. You raised me. You made me strong enough to survive. And now I'm using that strength to make sure you never have to scrub another floor or worry about rent or skip meals so you can afford medicine." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to refuse out of principle. But God, she was tired. 52 years old, with aching hands and a bad knee, and nothing saved for a future that looked increasingly bleak. "One condition," she said. "Name it. I want to work. Not cleaning, but something. I need purpose, Marco. I can't just sit around being kept." Marco smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine. "I own a dozen legitimate businesses. Restaurants, a laundromat, a dry cleaner, a flower shop. You can manage any of them. Or do the books. Or just show up for decoration if you want. But yes, Mama, you can work." "A flower shop?" Elena's lips twitched despite everything. "You own a flower shop?" "Legitimate front. Very profitable." Marco pulled out his phone again. "I'm having Tony arrange for movers. Pack whatever you want to keep. The rest we'll replace." "Today? You want me to move today?" "Today. Tomorrow at the latest. This place." Marco's jaw clenched. "I can't leave you here knowing what I know now." Elena looked around her tiny apartment. 5 years of her life compressed into 450 square feet. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The independence she'd fought so hard for. The proof that she could survive on her own. But she was so tired of fighting. And her son, her dangerous, powerful, terrible son, was offering her a way out. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Marco's relief was palpable. He stood, pulled out his phone, started making calls with the efficiency of a man used to giving orders and having them followed immediately. Elena listened to him arrange her entire life with a few quick conversations. Movers, apartment viewings, medical appointments for her to see an actual doctor about her arthritis and get proper prescriptions. He did it all while standing in her tiny kitchen, one hand gesturing as he spoke, his expensive suit incongruous against her cheap appliances. And Elena realized with a start that this was who her son was now. Not just a mafia boss, but a man who moved through the world with absolute authority. A man who could reshape reality with a phone call. A man who just walked through a door and found his mother signing away her freedom and decided that was unacceptable. When Marco finally hung up, he looked at her with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner, Mama. Sorry for all of it." Elena stood and crossed to him. She was shorter than she used to be, osteoporosis stealing inches from her spine, and he towered over her now. But when she pulled him into a hug, he folded into her arms like he used to when he was small and the world was too big and scary. "You're here now," she said into his shoulder. "That's what matters." They stood like that for a long moment. A mother and her son, finding their way back to each other through 8 years of silence and all the terrible choices that filled that gap. Outside, New York City continued its endless rhythm. Inside, 2 people tried to figure out how to be a family again when one of them was a monster and the other had been crushed by the very world he'd conquered. It wouldn't be easy. There would be fights and tears and moments when Elena questioned whether she could reconcile her son's violence with her own moral code. But for now, in this tiny apartment that she'd never have to return to, Elena held her boy and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way forward together, even if that path was paved with blood money and protected by men who killed for a living. Because at the end of the day, he was still her son, and she was still his mother, and sometimes that was enough. The penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park from the 32nd floor of a building Marco owned through a network of shell corporations. Elena stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city spread out below her like a glittering tapestry, and felt completely untethered from reality. This couldn't be her life. This marble-floored, 3-bedroom, 2.5-bathroom palace with its designer furniture and smart home technology and kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. This wasn't where Elena Rossi belonged. "What do you think, Mama?" Marco's voice came from behind her. He'd been hovering since the movers finished 2 hours ago, watching her reaction to everything with an everything intensity that made her nervous. "I think," Elena said carefully, "that this apartment is bigger than every place I've ever lived combined. You don't like it." Marco's face fell. "We can look at other properties. I have a building in Brooklyn that—" "Marco, this place probably costs more per month than I made in a year. 12,000. He said it casually, like $12,000 a month was pocket change. "But you're not paying, so it doesn't matter." Elena turned from the window to face her son. He'd shed his suit jacket somewhere, rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars she didn't want to ask about. He looked tired. More than tired, exhausted in a bone-deep way that came from years of carrying too much weight. "It matters to me," Elena said quietly. "Marco, I appreciate what you're trying to do. Really. But this is too much. It's too fast. Yesterday I was living in a studio in Queens, and now I'm in a penthouse in Manhattan, with a doorman who called me ma'am, and someone named Sophia who apparently comes 3 times a week to clean. You're not cleaning anymore," Marco said firmly. "That's not negotiable. I didn't say I wanted to clean. I said this is overwhelming." Elena moved to the leather couch Buttersoft, probably cost more than a car, and sat down carefully, like the furniture might reject her. "I need time to adjust." Marco joined her, keeping a respectful distance. "I know it's a lot, but Mama, you have to understand. The world I live in, the people I deal with, they look for weaknesses. If anyone found out about you, found out that Elena Rossi living in a rundown studio in Queens is my mother—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "You'd become a target." Ice water flooded Elena's veins. A target for what? Leverage, revenge, message sending. Marco's voice was flat, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "I have enemies, Mama. Rival families who'd love nothing more than to hurt me. And the easiest way to hurt a man is through the people he loves." Elena's hand went to her throat. She'd been so caught up in the shock of seeing Marco again, in the revelation of what he'd become, that she hadn't considered the implications. Her son wasn't just powerful, he was dangerous. And danger attracted danger. "Have I put you at risk?" she asked. "All these years living on my own, working in people's homes. Was I—" "You were safe because no one knew about you," Marco interrupted gently. "I made sure of it. Kept your name out of everything. Used different last names for business. Built walls between my life and yours." His expression darkened. "But now that's changed. Victoria Blackwell knows. Her staff probably knows. Word spreads fast in certain circles. Because you threatened her. Because I protected you." Marco leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And I'd do it again. 100 times. I don't care who knows anymore, Mama. I'm done pretending I don't have a mother. Done hiding the most important person in my life like she's a weakness." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. The most important person in his life. After 8 years of silence, 8 years of wondering if he'd forgotten her or moved on or just stopped caring, here was her son telling her she'd always mattered. "So what now?" Elena asked. "I live in this palace and pretend everything's normal? Now you live safely while I make sure everyone knows you're under my protection." Marco pulled out his phone, showed her something on the screen. "I've already sent word through the channels. Elena Rossi is my mother. She's untouchable. Anyone who even looks at her wrong answers to me." Elena stared at the message thread-coded language she didn't fully understand, but the intent was clear. Her son was claiming her publicly in his world, painting a target on himself to keep her safe. "Won't that make you more vulnerable?" she asked quietly. "Yes." Marco pocketed his phone. "But I don't care. I've been invulnerable for too long. Untouchable. No family, no connections, nothing anyone could use against me." His eyes met hers. Turns out that kind of safety is just another word for loneliness. Before Elena could respond, the apartment's doorbell chimed a melodic sound, nothing like the harsh buzzer in her old building. Marco tensed immediately, his hand moving to his waistband where Elena now noticed the bulge of a concealed weapon. "Expecting someone?" she asked nervously. "The doctor." "I scheduled your appointment for this evening." Marco stood, moving to the door with predatory caution. He checked the security screen, then relaxed fractionally. "It's okay. It's Dr. Chen." He opened the door to reveal a woman in her late 40s, carrying a medical bag and wearing a kind smile. She was petite, elegant, with graying hair pulled into a neat bun. "Mr. Rossi," she said, nodding respectfully. Then her eyes found Elena. "And you must be Mrs. Rossi. I'm Dr. Jennifer. Chen, your son asked me to do a house call." "A house call?" Elena looked at Marco. "Doctors don't make house calls anymore." "This one does," Dr. Chen said warmly, stepping inside. "For special patients." She didn't elaborate, but Elena understood. For patients connected to Marco Rossi, apparently anything was possible. The examination took an hour. Dr. Chen was thorough, professional, and kinder than any doctor Elena had seen in years. She took blood samples, tested Elena's mobility, examined the cut on her palm that was starting to show signs of infection from being left untreated. "Your arthritis is quite advanced," Dr. Chen said gently, making notes on her tablet. "When was your last treatment?" "I was taking medication," Elena admitted. "But I ran out last week. The prescription was expensive, and I had to choose between that and rent." Dr. Chen's expression tightened, but she didn't comment. "I'm going to prescribe something stronger. Also anti-inflammatories and a topical cream. I'll have everything delivered tonight." She looked at Marco, who hovered nearby like a concerned hawk. "She should also see a specialist. Rheumatologist. I can make a referral." "Do it," Marco said immediately. "Whatever she needs. Cost doesn't matter." "Of course." Dr. Chen turned back to Elena. "I'm also concerned about your blood pressure. It's quite elevated. Have you been under stress recently?" Elena almost laughed. "Stress? Yes, you could say that. Finding out your son is a mafia boss after 8 years of silence definitely qualified as stressful." "A bit," she said instead. "I'll prescribe something for that too. And Mrs. Rossi?" Dr. Chen touched her hand gently. "Take care of yourself. You've been neglecting your health for too long. Let your son help you." After Dr. Chen left, Elena found Marco in the kitchen, a sprawling space with marble countertops and professional-grade appliances Elena had no idea how to use. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid Italian. Elena's Italian was rusty, limited to what her own mother had taught her years ago, but she caught enough words to understand he was arranging something. Security, maybe, or surveillance. When he hung up, he looked at her with that same exhausted expression. "The medications will be here within the hour. Tony's bringing them personally." "Tony, that's one of your men?" "My consigliere, basically my second in command." Marco opened the refrigerator, which Elena noticed had been stocked with food she didn't remember ordering. "He's also the one investigating where your monthly payments were going." "And?" Elena wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Marco's face darkened. "Someone in my finance department was intercepting the transfers, rerouting the money to their own accounts. They've been stealing from me for 8 years. What are you going to do to them?" "What do you think?" The casual way he said it made Elena's blood run cold. "Marco, they stole from my mother." Marco interrupted, his voice hard. "Nearly $500,000 over 8 years. Money that was supposed to keep you safe and comfortable while I built something worth having. Instead, you were working yourself to death because someone in my organization thought they could skim off the top without consequences. So you're going to kill them." Marco poured himself a glass of water, his movements precise, controlled. "I'm going to make sure they understand that stealing from me, especially money meant for you, carry severe consequences. What form those consequences take depends on how cooperative they are. Elena sank onto one of the kitchen bar stools. I don't know if I can live with this. Knowing that people are being hurt because of me. They're being hurt because they made a choice, Marco corrected. He set down his glass and moved to stand in front of her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Mama, listen to me. I know this world is ugly. I know what I do is wrong by every measure you raised me with. But this is the reality of my life. People respect power and fear consequences. If I let someone steal from my mother without response, I look weak. And weakness in my world gets you killed. So you become the killer instead. Yes. No hesitation, no apology. Just brutal honesty. Elena looked up at her son, this dangerous stranger wearing her baby's face, and tried to reconcile the two versions of him. The boy who used to cry at sad movies and the man who spoke casually about violence. They existed in the same body, the same person, separated by years and choices, and a world that had hardened him into steel. I don't have to like it, she said finally. I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to accept that this is who I am. Marco's hands tightened on her shoulders. And to understand that everything I do, every choice I make, it's to protect what's mine. And you, Mama, you're mine. You're the only thing I have that's real. That matters. The doorbell chimed again. This time, Marco checked the screen and nodded. Tony's here with your medications. He opened the door to reveal a man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, sharp suit, the build of someone who'd been a fighter once. Tony carried a pharmacy bag and had the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much. Boss, Tony said, nodding to Marco. Then his eyes found Elena, and his entire demeanor softened. Mrs. Rossi, it's an honor to finally meet you. Finally? Elena took the bag he offered. The boss talks about you, Tony said with a slight smile. More than he probably realizes. We've all been curious about the woman who raised him. Marco shot Tony a warning look, but Tony just grinned. Your sons had us sending you flowers every year on Mother's Day. Did you get them? Elena's breath caught. The anonymous flowers. That was me, Marco admitted, looking uncomfortable. I couldn't call, couldn't risk contact, but I wanted you to know I was thinking about you. Anonymous flowers, Elena repeated, emotions warring in her chest. Anger that he'd hidden himself, relief that he'd been thinking of her, grief for all the lost years. Marco, I thought they were from a secret admirer. Some old man from the neighborhood. Tony barked a laugh. That's actually funny. Boss, she thought. Thank you, Tony. That's enough. Marco's tone was firm but fond. These two had history, Elena realized. Trust built over years of working together. I should brief you on the situation, Tony said, his humor fading. We identified the person skimming the payments. Junior accountant named Dennis Caruso. He's been with us for 12 years, completely trusted position. Where is he now? Marco's voice went cold. Secured location. Waiting for you. Tony glanced at Elena, clearly uncomfortable discussing this in front of her. We also found evidence that he's been selling information to the Moretti family. Marco went very still. The Morettis. Looks like he's been feeding them intel on our operations for at least 3 years. The money he stole from your mother? That was just his personal side hustle. Elena watched her son's face transform. The concerned boy disappeared, replaced by something terrifying. Something that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. How much has he compromised? Marco asked. We're assessing now. But boss, this is bad. If the Morettis know about Mrs. Rossi, they know, Marco interrupted. Dennis would have told them everything. Probably sold them the information for a nice bonus. Then we need to move fast. The Morettis will see her as leverage. Let them try. Marco's smile was razor sharp. I want Dennis kept alive until I get there. No one touches him until I do. Understood? Understood. Tony hesitated. Boss, about Mrs. Rossi. Maybe we should consider additional security. Personal detail. 24/7 protection. Already arranged. I have 3 teams rotating shifts. 6 men on duty at all times. Marco looked at Elena. You won't see most of them. They'll stay out of sight unless there's a problem. 6 men? Elena's voice came out higher than she intended. Marco, that's insane. I don't need, you do. Marco's tone brooked no argument. The Morettis are one of our biggest rivals. If they think they can use you to get to me, they will. I'm not taking chances with your safety. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist this was too much, too paranoid, too controlling. But the look in Tony's eyes stopped her. He wasn't humoring a paranoid boss. He was genuinely concerned about a real threat. "This is my life now?" Elena asked quietly. "Living in a fortress? With guards watching my every move?" "Until we neutralize the threat," Marco said. "Then we can reassess." "Neutralize." Elena turned the word over in her mind. "You mean kill whoever's targeting me?" "If necessary?" "Yes." Marco moved to her, crouched down so they were eye level. "Mama, I know this isn't what I wanted, but you're in my world now, and in my world we protect our own by any means necessary." Tony cleared his throat. "I should go." "Boss, you'll come by later?" "In an hour. Make sure Dennis doesn't go anywhere." After Tony left, Elena and Marco stood in the expensive kitchen of the penthouse fortress she now called home. The medications sat on the counter, 6 different prescriptions that would actually treat her conditions instead of just managing symptoms. The refrigerator hummed quietly, full of food she hadn't bought. Through the windows, Central Park spread out in artificial lights and natural darkness. "I need time," Elena said finally. "Time to process all of this. Time to figure out how to be your mother again when you've become someone I don't recognize." "Take all the time you need," Marco replied. "But Mama, know this. I may have changed. I may have become someone who does terrible things, but the reason I do them, the core of why I built this empire," he touched his chest over his heart, "that hasn't changed. I did this for us, for you, so you'd never have to be powerless again. And look where it's gotten us," Elena said softly. "You're powerful, yes, but you're also in danger. I'm in danger. We're both living in cages, yours made of violence, mine made of marble and bodyguards. Maybe. But at least we're alive. At least we're together." Marco stood, pulling out his phone. "I need to go handle the Dennis situation. There's food in the fridge. The remote for the TV is on the coffee table. Your medications are here, take them with food, like Dr. Chen said." "You're leaving?" Elena tried to keep the panic out of her voice. "I have to, but Tony's outside, and there are guards in the building." "You're safe here, Mama. I promise." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so familiar from childhood that Elena's eyes burned, and then he was gone, leaving her alone in a palace that felt like a prison. Elena stood in the kitchen for a long time after he left. Then, moving slowly, she explored her new home, the master bedroom, with its king-size bed, and ensuite bathroom, bigger than her old apartment. The second bedroom that Marco had set up as an office, complete with a laptop and a note, for when you're ready to help with the flower shop books. The third bedroom was empty, except for boxes. Elena opened one and found photo albums, pictures she thought she'd lost years ago in a move, baby pictures of Marco, school photos. Her wedding pictures with Antonio, dead 18 years now from a heart attack that could have been prevented if they'd had insurance and money for a good doctor. Someone had saved all of this. Moved it from her old apartment, preserved her history. Marco had done this. Before he left, before 8 years of silence, he'd taken these pieces of their life and kept them safe. Elena sank onto the floor, surrounded by photos and memories, and cried. For the boy who'd become a monster. For the mother who'd failed to protect him from that transformation. For the years they'd lost. For the danger they were both in now. But also for the strange, terrible hope blooming in her chest. Because her son had come back. He was dangerous and violent and everything she'd raised him not to be. But he loved her. He'd never stopped loving her. And maybe, just maybe, that love could be the bridge between who he was and who he could still become, even if the path was paved with blood and guarded by men with guns. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving in her kitchen. For one disoriented moment, she thought she was back in Queens, back in her studio with its familiar sounds and smells. Then she opened her eyes and saw the high ceiling, the expensive art on the walls, the morning light streaming through windows that overlooked Central Park. Right, the penthouse, her new life, her new cage. She pulled on the robe that had been hanging in the bathroom cashmere, soft as a cloud, probably cost more than a week's wages, and padded out to find Marco standing at the stove, cooking eggs. He'd changed from his suit into jeans and a black t-shirt, and Elena was struck by how young he looked like this. Less Mafia boss, more the boy she remembered, except for the gun visible in a holster at the small of his back. You're still here, she said, her voice rough from sleep. Marco turned, and Elena noticed the dark circles under his eyes. I never left. Figured you might need someone here your first night. What about Dennis? The traitor? Taken care of. Marco's voice was flat. He won't be a problem anymore. Elena didn't ask what taken care of meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Instead, she moved to the kitchen island and sat on one of the bar stools, accepting the coffee Marco poured her. You cooked, she observed. Eggs and toast. Don't get excited, it's the limit of my culinary skills. Marco plated the food and set it in front of her. Dr. Chen said you should eat with your medications. They ate in silence for a while. The food was simple but good, and Elena realized she was actually hungry. Yesterday had been such chaos that she'd barely eaten. I made some calls last night, Marco said, pushing eggs around his plate. About the flower shop. If you're serious about working, I can have you start next week. The current manager is solid, but she could use help with the books. You always were good with numbers. I took 1 semester of accounting before I had to drop out, Elena said. That's 1 semester more than Maria has. She runs the place on instinct and charm. Marco smiled slightly. You'd like her. No nonsense. Reminds me of you. Elena sipped her coffee, studying her son. He looked exhausted, but there was something else too. Relief, maybe. Like having her here, safe under his protection, had eased a burden he'd been carrying for too long. Tell me about your life, she said. The real version. Not the sanitized story you'd tell a civilian. Marco set down his fork. Mama, I'm your mother, Marco. If I'm going to be part of your world now, I need to understand it. Really understand it. Marco was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much truth to tell her. Finally, he spoke. I run the Rossi family operations in New York. Drug distribution, protection rackets, gambling, loan sharking, some prostitution, though I'm trying to phase that out. We also have legitimate businesses, the flower shop, 3 restaurants, a construction company, a waste management service. Those are clean mostly. Good for laundering money. He said it so matter-of-factly, like discussing a normal career. Elena's stomach churned, but she kept her expression neutral. I have about 200 men who work for me directly, Marco continued. Another 1,000 or so who are connected in some way. I answer to the heads of the 5 families in New York, but I have autonomy in my territory. My job is to make money, keep the peace with our allies, and eliminate threats to our operations. And the Morettis? One of those threats. Marco's jaw tightened. Lorenzo Moretti runs the family now. His father and mine were rivals back in the day. When I took over the Rossi operations 6 years ago, I tried to negotiate peace. Lorenzo refused. He thinks he's untouchable, that he can expand into my territory without consequences. And now he knows about me. Now he knows about you, Marco confirmed. Which means he'll try to use you as leverage, either to force me to cede territory, or as a bargaining chip if I move against him. His eyes met hers. I won't let that happen. Whatever it takes, Mama, I'll keep you safe. Elena heard the promise in his voice, the absolute conviction. Her son would burn down the city before he let anyone hurt her. That's a lot of weight to carry, she said softly. All these people depending on you. All these threats to manage. Do you ever sleep? Not much. Marco rubbed his eyes. 3, 4 hours a night when I'm lucky. Can't afford to let my guard down. The moment I show weakness, someone will try to take what I've built. That's not sustainable, baby. You're going to burn out. Probably. He said it like it was inevitable. Like he'd accepted his own eventual destruction as the cost of power. Elena's heart ached. This was what her son had become. A man who didn't sleep because he couldn't trust anyone, who carried violence like a shield and used fear like a weapon, who'd built an empire on suffering and convinced himself it was all for a good reason. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? She asked. Something that wasn't about business or strategy or maintaining power? Marco thought about it. I don't know. Years, probably. That's no way to live. It's the only way I know how. Marco stood, started clearing dishes. This life, Mama, it doesn't leave room for hobbies or relaxation. You're always on, always watching, always ready for the next threat. Elena watched him move around her kitchen with practiced efficiency. This penthouse, she realized, wasn't just a safe house for her. It was Marco's home too, or one of them. He probably had several properties scattered around the city, never staying in one place too long, always moving to stay ahead of enemies. When I left 8 years ago, Marco said suddenly, his back to her as he loaded the dishwasher, I promised myself I'd make something of my life, that I'd build something real, something that would make you proud. He laughed bitterly. Guess I failed on that last part. You didn't fail. Mama, I'm a criminal. I hurt people for a living. I've killed. He stopped, shook his head. I've done things that would make you sick. How is that anything to be proud of? Elena stood and moved to him, touching his shoulder until he turned to face her. You survived. In a world that tried to crush you, that took your father and left us with nothing, you survived and thrived. I don't like how you did it. I won't pretend the violence doesn't horrify me. But Marco, you're alive. You're successful. You came back for me. I should have come back sooner. Maybe. But you're here now. Elena cupped his face in her hands, looking up at this dangerous stranger wearing her son's face. And we're going to figure this out together. Somehow. Marco's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned. Tony needs me. There's a situation with one of our warehouses. Moretti's guys making noise about expanding their operations into our territory. Go. Do what you need to do. Elena stepped back. I'll be fine here. You sure? Marco hesitated. I can send Tony to handle it. I'm sure. Go be the boss. She smiled slightly. I need time to think anyway. Process everything. Marco grabbed his jacket, checked his gun. At the door, he paused. There's a phone on the counter. Tony's number is programmed in as number 1. You need anything at all, you call him. He'll either handle it or get me. I'll be fine, Elena repeated. After he left, Elena stood in the silent penthouse and tried to figure out what to do with herself. This apartment full of expensive things and empty hours, no work to rush off to, no bills to worry about paying, no schedule except the one she made for herself. It was disorienting, terrifying. Like standing on the edge of a cliff and not knowing if the next step would find solid ground or send her tumbling into the void. She took her medications, 6 different pills with water, and the rest of her breakfast, like Dr. Chen had instructed. Then she showered in the massive bathroom with its rainfall showerhead and heated floors. She dressed in clothes she'd brought from her old apartment, simple, worn, comfortable things that looked out of place in this palace. Then she explored properly. Not just the surface-level tour from yesterday, but really looked at what Marco had built here, what he'd created for her. The 3rd bedroom with the boxes of photos had more than just pictures. There were her mother's recipes, handwritten on index cards yellowed with age. A quilt Elena thought she'd donated years ago. Books she'd loved. Small pieces of her history that Marco had somehow preserved. He'd been watching over her. All these years of silence, he'd been making sure pieces of her life were protected. It was stalking, maybe. Definitely controlling. But also heartbreakingly tender in a twisted way. Elena found herself in Marco's bedroom. She'd avoided it yesterday, respecting his privacy. But now curiosity drew her in. The room was sparse, almost monastic. A king bed with dark sheets, 1 nightstand, a dresser. No art on the walls, no personal items visible. But the nightstand drawer held secrets. Elena opened it, snooping. Yes, but she was his mother, and after 8 years she figured she'd earned some answers and found a photograph. Creased and faded, obviously carried for years. It showed Elena and Marco on his 8th birthday. She was hugging him, both of them laughing at something Antonio had said behind the camera. They looked so happy, so normal, like any mother and son celebrating a birthday. Before cancer took Antonio, before poverty ground them down, before Marco had to become hard to survive. Underneath the photo was a worn rosary. Elena picked it up with trembling hands and recognized it immediately. It had been Antonio's. She'd given it to Marco at his father's funeral, told him it would protect him. Her son, the ruthless Mafia boss, still carried his father's rosary. Elena sank onto Marco's bed, clutching the rosary and the photograph, and cried. For the boy in the picture, who still believed in protection and prayer. For the man he'd become who carried these tokens, like talismans, against a darkness he'd willingly walked into. She didn't hear the door open. Didn't realize she had company until a voice spoke. Mrs. Rossi, I'm sorry to intrude. Elena jumped, wiping her eyes. Quickly. A woman stood in the bedroom doorway, mid-30s. Pretty. with dark hair pulled into a ponytail and the lean build of someone who trained regularly. She wore jeans and a blazer, and Elena noticed the gun holstered at her hip. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. "I'm Angela Moretti, no relation to Lorenzo. Different Morettis, I'm part of your security detail. I was doing a perimeter check and heard crying. Wanted to make sure you were okay. You're one of the guards?" Elena set down the photo and rosary, embarrassed at being caught in Marco's private space. "Yes, ma'am. Tony assigned me to your detail specifically. Figured you might be more comfortable with at least one woman on the team." Elena studied Angela. She had kind eyes, but the alert stillness of someone always ready for violence. "How long have you worked for my son?" 4 years. Started as security for one of the legitimate businesses. Moved up to personal protection about 2 years ago." Angela shifted her. "Wait. Mr. Rossi is a good boss. Fair. Loyal to people who are loyal to him. But dangerous. Very." Angela didn't sugarcoat it. "But ma'am, if I can speak freely, the men who aren't dangerous don't survive in this world. Your son is alive and powerful because he's willing to do what others won't. That's not a character flaw in our line of work. It's a survival skill." Elena gestured to the bed. "Sit, please. I could use someone to talk to who isn't my son." Angela hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with such informality, but eventually sat on the edge of the bed. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. What's he really like when I'm not around? How does he treat his people? Is he cruel? Fair? Does he enjoy the violence, or is it just business?" Angela was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Rossi isn't cruel for cruelty's sake. When he has to hurt someone, it's calculated, purposeful. He doesn't torture for fun or kill unnecessarily. But when someone crosses him or threatens his people," she met Elena's eyes, "he's absolutely ruthless, makes examples to send messages. That's how he maintains control. And his people? Does he care about them? More than most bosses in this life." Angela's voice softened. "Last year, one of our guys got shot during a warehouse dispute. Tommy. Young kid, only been with us a year. Mr. Rossi personally stayed at the hospital for 3 days until Tommy was stable. Paid all the medical bills. Made sure Tommy's mother was taken care of. That's not normal, Mrs. Rossi. Most bosses would have sent flowers and moved on." Elena absorbed this. Her son, who stayed at hospitals, who took care of his people's families, who was ruthless, but not needlessly cruel. "He talks about you sometimes," Angela continued, "when he's tired or stressed. Says things like, 'My mother would be disappointed,' or 'My mother raised me better than this.' You're his conscience, Mrs. Rossi." The voice in his head reminding him he's still human. Doesn't seem like he listens to that voice very often. Maybe not, but it's there. That's more than most men in his position can say. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elena asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Am I really in danger, or is Marco being paranoid?" Angela's expression turned serious. "You're in real danger. Lorenzo Moretti is ambitious and cruel. If he thinks he can use you to gain leverage over your son, he'll try, and he won't be gentle about it." She paused. "But Mrs. Rossi, you're also probably the most protected civilian in New York right now. Your son has put his best people on your detail. He's made it clear that anyone who touches you dies slowly. That kind of protection, backed by that kind of reputation, most people won't even try." "Most people. The smart ones won't. But there's always someone stupid enough or desperate enough to try something." Angela stood. "Which is why I'm here. Why we're all here. To make sure those stupid people don't get close enough to try." After Angela left, Elena remained in Marco's room, holding his father's rosary and staring at the photograph of happier times. She thought about the boy who'd carried these things for years, who'd built an empire on violence but still kept tokens of love and faith. Her son was broken, damaged by a world that had taken too much too soon. But he wasn't completely lost. Pieces of who he'd been still existed underneath the armor. The question was, could those pieces be salvaged? Or had Marco gone too far down this path to ever find his way back? Elena didn't have answers, but sitting in her son's monastic bedroom, surrounded by evidence of the humanity he tried so hard to hide, she felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. Hope. Fragile, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, the boy she'd raised still existed somewhere inside the monster everyone feared. And if he existed, maybe he could be reached. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. 3 days passed in, Strange domesticity. Marco came and went at odd hours, 2 a.m., arrivals, 6 a.m., departures. But he always checked on Elena, always made sure she had everything she needed, always asked about her medications, her pain levels, whether she was sleeping okay. Elena settled into a routine of sorts. Morning walks in Central Park with Angela shadowing her at a discreet distance. Afternoons exploring the neighborhood or reading books she'd never had time for when she was working 3 jobs. Evenings cooking dinner, real meals, not the quick packaged things she'd survived on for years, and sometimes Marco would be there to eat with her. They talked. Careful conversations that danced around the violence of his life but slowly built bridges between who they'd been and who they were now. Marco told stories about his organization-edited versions, Elena suspected, and she told him about the families she'd worked for, the houses she'd cleaned, the invisible life she'd lived. It was almost normal, almost comfortable, until the 3rd night, when everything went to hell. Elena was in the kitchen, preparing chicken marsala, one of Marco's favorites from childhood, when her phone rang. Not the new smartphone Marco had given her, but her old cell phone that she'd kept out of habit. The number was blocked. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Elena Rossi?" The voice was male, smooth, cultured. Not someone she recognized. "Who is this?" "A concerned friend. I wanted to warn you about your son." Ice flooded Elena's veins. "I don't know who you are, but my name is Lorenzo Moretti. I believe Marco has mentioned me." Elena's hand clenched around the phone. "The rival. The threat. The reason she needed 6 bodyguards. How did you get this number?" "I have resources." Lorenzo's voice held a smile. "I wanted to reach out personally, woman to woman, man to woman, to discuss your son. I have nothing to discuss with you. Hear me." "Hang out, Mrs. Rossi. Just 5 minutes. Then you can hang up and tell Marco I called, and he can bluster and threaten and plan revenge. But give me 5 minutes first." Elena should hang up, should call Tony immediately, but curiosity and something else, something darker, made her stay on the line. "Talk fast. Your son is a dangerous man. I'm sure you've realized that by now. He's built his empire on violence and fear, eliminated rivals, destroyed anyone who got in his way. But has he told you about the innocents?" "What innocents?" "The collateral damage. The witnesses who saw too much. The families of his enemies who became targets just for being related to the wrong person." Lorenzo's voice was silk over steel. 2 years ago, Marco went to war with the Castellano family over territory. He won, of course. But in the process, he had Antonio Castellano's wife and 14-year-old daughter killed. "Insurance," he called it, making sure there was no one left to seek revenge. Elena's stomach lurched. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask him yourself. Ask him about Maria and Rosa Castellano. Ask him if he gave the order to eliminate the entire bloodline." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because, Mrs. Rossi, I think you're a good woman, a moral woman. And I think if you knew what your son really was, you might convince him to retire, to step back before more innocent people die." Lorenzo paused. "I'm offering him a way out. Let him know I'm willing to negotiate terms. He cedes his territory, takes his money, and disappears to live quietly with his mother. Everyone wins. Everyone except the people you'd hurt, filling the power vacuum he leaves behind." Lorenzo laughed. "You're smarter than I expected. But Mrs. Rossi, understand this. With or without Marco's cooperation, I'm expanding my operations. The only question is how much blood gets spilled in the process. If Marco fights, a lot of people die, including, potentially, you. If he steps aside peacefully, everyone walks, away breathing. So this is a threat. This is a courtesy call. A one-time offer of mercy from one professional to another." Lorenzo's voice hardened. "Think about it, Mrs. Rossi. Think about whether your son's empire is worth dying for, because that's what's at stake now. Your life for his pride." The line went dead. Elena stood frozen in her kitchen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind reeling. The chicken was burning on the stove. She didn't notice. Maria and Rosa Castellano, a wife and daughter, 14 years old. Had Marco really mama? Elena spun to find Marco standing in the doorway, still in his suit, his expression shifting from tired to concerned as he took in her face. "What happened?" He was across the kitchen in seconds, his hands on her shoulders. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I got a phone call," Elena said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Lorenzo Moretti. Marco went very still. The temperature in the room dropped. What did he say? He offered you a deal. Your territory for your life. Said if you refuse, people will die. Including, Elena's voice broke. Including me. Marco's jaw clenched so tight Elena heard his teeth grind. That son of a bitch. How did he get your number? He has resources, apparently. Elena stepped back from Marco's grip. Is it true? About the Castellano family? The flash of guilt across Marco's face told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. It's complicated, Marco said carefully. Uncomplicate it. Did you have a woman and her teenage daughter killed? Marco ran his hand through his hair, suddenly looking every one of his 31 years. Yes, but not the way Lorenzo made it sound. How many ways are there to kill a child, Marco? Mama, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you murdered a 14-year-old girl? That you killed someone's mother? Elena's voice rose. How do you explain that away? The daughter wasn't innocent, Marco said, his voice hard. Rosa Castellano was being trained to take over her father's operations. At 14, she'd already been involved in 2 murders. She was carrying on the blood feud, making plans to come after me once she was old enough to claim her father's territory. She was a child. She was a killer. Marco's composure cracked. And the mother, Maria? She wasn't some helpless civilian. She ran the financial side of the Castellano operation. Laundered money, bribed officials, ordered hits when Antonio was in prison. She was as guilty as he was. So you killed them both. I ended a war before it could destroy us all. Marco's hands were shaking. You want the truth, Mama? Here it is. In this life, mercy gets you killed. You leave enemies alive. They come back stronger. They wait until you're weak and then they strike. Antonio Castellano tried to have me assassinated 3 times before I moved against him. 3 times I woke up to find my guards dead and my house compromised. The 3rd time, one of his guys got close enough to put a gun to my head before Tony took him down. Elena sank into a kitchen chair, her legs giving out. So you killed his entire family. I eliminated the threat. Completely. Because that's what you do in this world. Marco crouched in front of her, forcing her to look at him. I know how it sounds. I know what it makes me. But Mama, if I had shown mercy, if I had left them alive, they would have killed me. And then where would you be? Still cleaning houses. Still struggling. Still 1 accident away from homelessness. Don't you dare, Elena whispered. Don't you dare justify murdering a child by claiming you did it for me. I'm not justifying it. I'm explaining it. Marco's voice was raw. Everything I've done, every terrible choice, it's all been about survival. About building something strong enough that no one can ever hurt us again. You think I enjoy this? You think I like being the monster everyone fears? I think you've convinced. Put yourself you had no choice. That the ends justify the means. Elena touched his face gently, sadly. But baby, you always have a choice. Every time you pull that trigger, every time you give an order that ends a life, you're choosing violence over every other option. There are no other options. There are always other options. You just don't like them because they're harder. Because they require faith that people can be better, that mercy isn't always weakness. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Your father believed that. He was kind in a world that punished kindness. And yes, it killed him. But Marco, he died with his soul intact. Can you say the same? Marco stood abruptly, stepping back. My father died poor and broken at 43. He worked honest jobs that paid nothing and got him nowhere. He was kind, and what did it get him? An early grave and a family he left destitute. It got him a wife who loved him and a son who mourned him. Elena stood, moving to the stove to turn. Off the ruined chicken. Your father died knowing he'd lived with integrity, that he'd harmed no one. Can you imagine how that must have felt? To face death with a clean conscience? Conscience doesn't pay the bills. No, but it lets you sleep at night. Elena scraped the burned chicken into the trash. Or does it? How do you sleep, Marco? When you close your eyes, do you see their faces? All the people you've killed or ordered killed, the innocents and the guilty alike? The silence was her answer. You don't sleep, Elena said softly, turning to look at her son. You stay up night after night because when you close your eyes, they're there, waiting, haunting you with what you've done. Mama, I love you. The words stopped Marco mid-sentence. I love you more than anything in this world. You are my son and nothing will change that. But Marco, I can't pretend what you've done is okay. I can't tell you it's fine that you've killed children in the name of security. I won't absolve you just because you did it for us. So what then? Marco's voice cracked. You want me to stop? Walk away like Lorenzo suggested? Let him take everything I've built and hope he doesn't kill us both once I'm powerless? I want you to be better. Elena moved to him, took his hands in hers. I want you to find a way to survive that doesn't require becoming something monstrous. I want you to sleep at night without ghosts. I want you to look in the mirror and see someone you're proud of instead of someone you've had to become. That's impossible. Only if you believe it is. They stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of burned food and broken dreams. Elena watched her son struggle with everything she'd said, saw him trying to reconcile the mother he loved with the judgment she was passing. I can't be soft, Marco finally said. Not in this world. Soft gets you killed. I'm not asking you to be soft. I'm asking you to be human. Elena squeezed his hands. There's a difference between weakness and mercy, between being vulnerable and being victim. Marco's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, checked the screen, and his entire body tensed. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Lorenzo's guys just hit one of our warehouses. 3 of my men dead, the rest scattered. They left a message. Marco's face had gone cold, dangerous. They left a message specifically for you, Mama. For me? Marco showed her his phone. The message was a photo Elena's old apartment building in Queens, taken recently. Someone standing in front of her old door, holding a sign that read, "We know where you lived. We know everywhere you've been. One mistake and Mama dies." Elena's blood turned to ice. They're escalating, Marco said, his voice deadly calm. Lorenzo's done playing games. He wants me afraid, wants me to think he can reach you anytime he wants. Can he? Not while you're with me. Not with the security I have in place. Marco started texting rapidly. But this changes things. We can't just sit here waiting for him to make his move. I need to hit back, hard. Marco, wait. No waiting. Lorenzo Moretti just declared war. He threatened my mother. There's only one response to that. Elena watched her son transform before her eyes. The boy who'd been struggling with guilt and judgment disappeared, replaced by the ruthless boss who'd built an empire on fear. What are you going to do? She asked, though she already knew. I'm going to remind Lorenzo why people fear the Rossi name. Marco holstered his gun, straightened his jacket. And then I'm going to make him regret ever learning yours. Before Elena could respond, the lights went out. Not just in the apartment, the entire building went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in after a second, bathing everything in eerie red light. Marco moved immediately, pulling Elena behind him, his gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. Stay behind me. Don't move. What's happening? Either the power went out coincidentally right after Lorenzo threatened you, or the explosion answered his question. Somewhere below them, maybe 10 floors down, a massive boom shook the building. Glass shattered, people screamed. Or it's an attack, Marco finished grimly. He spoke rapidly into his phone. Tony, we're compromised. South Tower, 32nd floor. I need extraction now. And get me a status report on another explosion. Closer this time, Elena screamed, clutching Marco's arm. We need to move, Marco said. Now, stay close to me. Whatever happens, you stay close. They moved toward the door, but it burst open before they reached it. Angela stumbled through, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. Boss, she gasped. They're in the building. At least 10 men, maybe more. Professionals. They cut power, blocked the elevators, and they're working their way up floor by floor. Lorenzo's men? Has to be. They knew exactly how to bypass our security. Angela pulled her gun, checked her magazine. We have maybe 5 minutes before they reach this floor. Marco's jaw clenched. The panic room. It's reinforced, has its own power supply. They'll just wait us out, Elena said, surprising herself with how calm her voice sounded. If we hide, they'll know exactly where we are. We'll be trapped. Better trapped than dead. Marco moved to the wall, pressed a concealed panel that Elena had never noticed. A section of wall slid back, revealing a small room with walls that looked like they could withstand a nuclear blast. Get inside, both of you. What about you? Angela demanded. I'm going to slow them down. Buy time for Tony and the others to get here. Boss, that's suicide. That's an order. Marco's voice was hard, final. He looked at Elena, and for just a moment, his mask dropped. She saw fear. Not for himself, but for her. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry I brought you into this. I'm sorry I became this. But I'm not sorry I'll do anything to keep you alive. Marco, don't. He pushed her gently but firmly into the panic room. Angela stumbled in after her. Keep her safe, Marco ordered. No matter what you hear out here, you keep her safe. Marco! Elena lunged for the door, but it was already sliding shut. The last thing she saw was her son's face, determined, fierce, resigned to violence before the reinforced wall sealed them in darkness. From outside, muffled by thick walls, Elena heard gunfire. Her son, her baby boy, out there alone against professional killers. All because she was his weakness, his vulnerability, the thing Lorenzo Moretti could use to hurt him. Elena sank against the wall, Angela's arm around her shoulders, and listened to the sounds of war tearing through her home, and prayed that when the doors finally opened again, her son would still be alive on the other side. The panic room was soundproofed, but not perfectly. Elena could still hear the violence outside, the sharp crack of gunfire, the thuds of bodies hitting the floor, Marco's voice shouting orders to someone, anyone who might still be alive out there. Angela had her gun drawn, positioned between Elena and the door, her face set in grim determination. Blood still dripped from the gash on her forehead, but she ignored it. How long can he hold them off? Elena whispered. Against 10 trained men? Minutes. Maybe less. Angela's voice was tight. But Tony's on his way. If the boss can just stay alive long enough. An explosion rattled the walls, closer than the previous ones. The lights in the panic room flickered but held independent power supply, Marco had said. The walls shook but didn't crack. They're using grenades, Angela said grimly, trying to flush him out or bury him. Either way, the gunfire stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She pressed her hand against the wall as if she could somehow reach through steel and concrete to find her son. Marco, she whispered. Angela's phone buzzed. She checked it, her face going pale. Boss is down. Tony's 2 minutes out. Down? What does that mean? Is he? I don't know. Angela's hands were shaking. But Mrs. Rossi, we need to stay here. The boss's last order was to keep you safe. We don't move until Tony gives the all clear. My son is out there dying and you want me to hide? Elena moved toward the door. That's exactly what I want you to do. Angela blocked her path. Because if you die, everything your son just did to protect you was for nothing. Every man who died tonight died for nothing. You want to honor him? Stay alive. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to fight. But Angela was right. She was a 52-year-old woman with arthritis and no combat training. Going out there would just add her body to the count. So she waited, counted seconds that felt like hours, listened to the silence beyond the walls and tried not to imagine what down meant. Injured? Unconscious? Dead? No. She refused to believe Marco was dead. She'd just gotten him back. The universe couldn't be cruel enough to take him away again so soon. More gunfire erupted. Different weapons, different rhythm. Heavier, more controlled. That's Tony, Angela said with relief. He's here. The battle outside intensified. Elena heard shouting and Italian orders barked. Responses screamed. The chaos of combat. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes. Then, finally, silence again. Stay here, Angela ordered, moving to the panic room controls. She opened a panel Elena hadn't noticed, revealing a small monitor showing multiple camera angles of the penthouse. What Elena saw made her gasp. The living room was destroyed. Furniture overturned, bullet holes in the walls, blood splattered across her expensive marble floors. Bodies, she counted 4, lay motionless in positions that spoke of violent death. The smell of cordite and copper would be overwhelming out there, and in the center of it all, slumped against the wall near the kitchen, was Marco. His white shirt was dark with blood. His gun hand hung limp at his side. Tony knelt beside him, pressing something against his shoulder while talking urgently into his phone. We need to go, Elena said. My son needs... Wait. Angela held up a hand, listening to something in her earpiece. Tony says the building isn't secure yet. 2 of Lorenzo's men got away. They could be anywhere. I don't care. That's my son bleeding out there. Mrs. Rossi. Elena pushed past Angela and pressed the door release. The heavy steel door began to slide open. Damn it, Angela muttered, but she didn't try to stop her. Instead, she moved in front of Elena, gun raised, clearing angles as they exited into the carnage. The smell hit Elena first. Blood and gunpowder and something burning. Her expensive penthouse looked like a war zone. She stepped carefully around bodies, young men who'd probably had mothers of their own, who were now dead because of her son's world, because of her. Mama? Marco's voice was weak but alert. What are you're supposed to be? Shut up, Elena said, moving to his side. Up close, the damage was worse than she'd feared. The blood was coming from his shoulder, his side, maybe other places she couldn't see. Where are you hurt? Shoulder. 2 rounds. 1 through and through, 1 still in there. Marco tried to sit up straighter and winced. Side took a graze. Nothing vital. Nothing vital, Elena repeated, her hands shaking as she helped Tony apply pressure to the wounds. You're bleeding everywhere and you call it nothing vital. I've had worse, Marco said, attempting a smile that came out as a grimace. Tony looked at Elena with respect. Ma'am, we need to get him to our doctor. The building isn't secure. Then secure it. Elena snapped. My son isn't moving until we stop the bleeding. He'll bleed out in transport if we move him now. Mama's right, Marco said, his voice getting weaker. Few more minutes. Let her work. Elena had no medical training beyond basic first aid, but she'd raised a boy, dealt with scraped knees and split lips and once a broken arm. She knew how to stay calm in crisis, how to focus on the immediate problem and push away the panic for later. Angela, first aid kit, she ordered. There has to be one somewhere in this place. Bathroom. Cabinet under the sink. Marco's eyes were starting to unfocus. Mama, I'm sorry. About the call. About Lorenzo. About all of this. Save your strength. Elena accepted the first aid kit Angela retrieved and started pulling out supplies. Gauze, antiseptic, bandages. Not enough for gunshot wounds, but better than nothing. Tony, keep pressure on his shoulder. I'll handle the side wound. They worked in practiced rhythm. 2 people who'd never met before this week, coordinating to save Marco's life. Elena's hands were steady as she cleaned the graze on his side. Tony was right. It had missed anything vital, but it was deep and ugly. She packed it with gauze and wrapped it tight. The shoulder was worse. 1 bullet had gone clean through, leaving entry and exit wounds that were bleeding heavily. The other was still lodged inside, and Elena could see the bullet's outline under his skin. This needs surgery, she said. Later. Marco's hand caught hers, his grip weak. Lorenzo's men. They got away? 2 of them, Tony confirmed. We're tracking them, but they had a 30-second head start. Could be anywhere in the building. Not anywhere. Marco's eyes sharpened despite the pain and blood loss. They'll go for the service elevator. Only other way out now that we've locked down the main exits. 2nd basement level. There's a tunnel that leads to... He coughed, pain flashing across his face. Leads to the parking garage 3 blocks over. Emergency exit. Tony was already on his phone, barking orders. I've got teams moving too. Intercept. Boss, we should move you, Angela said. Every minute we stay here is a minute Lorenzo's guys might regroup and come back. She's right, Elena said, though it terrified her to move Marco when he was this injured. Can you stand? Can I stand? Marco muttered. Mama, I was just in a gunfight. Of course I can stand. He couldn't, not without help. Tony and Elena got on either side of him, taking his weight as he struggled to his feet. Marco's face went gray with pain, sweat beading on his forehead, but he stayed conscious. Service elevator, he gasped. Faster than the stairs. They made it into the hallway just as gunfire erupted somewhere below them. More of Tony's men engaging Lorenzo's escaped attackers, Elena realized. The war was still happening, still spreading. The elevator ride down was the longest 2 minutes of Elena's life. Marco's weight grew heavier as consciousness slipped. Blood dripped onto the polished elevator floor. Tony kept his gun trained on the Vases, doors while talking rapidly into his phone, coordinating his teams. Angela stood close to Elena, her own gun ready, blood still streaking down the side of her face from her earlier wound. How many of our people did we lose? Marco asked quietly. 6 confirmed dead, Tony said, his voice rough. 3 more injured. Lorenzo sent 15 men total. We've killed or captured 11. 4 got away, including the 2 heading for the tunnel. 11 bodies, Marco said. That's a statement. Lorenzo won't let that go unanswered. Boss, with respect, Lorenzo started this. He attacked your home, went after your mother. This is on him. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. Matters what happens next. Marco's eyes met Elena's. Mama, I need you to understand something. This isn't over. Tonight was just the opening move. Lorenzo's going to come at us harder now. Then we stop him, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. We end this before more people die. We? Marco's lips twitched, despite the pain. Mama, there's no we in stopping Lorenzo. You're going to be somewhere safe while I handle this. Like tonight was safe? Elena challenged. Marco, he attacked your fortress. He knew exactly where I was, exactly how to breach your security. Nowhere is safe as long as he's alive. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage. More of Marco's men waited there, a convoy of 3 black SUVs. Engines running, doors open. A man Elena didn't recognize approached, medical bag in hand. Dr. Reeves, Tony said. He's one of ours, former Army medic. Doctor. Reeves took one look at Marco and his expression turned grim. We need to get him to the facility. Now. He's lost too much blood. The facility? Elena asked. Private medical clinic, Tony explained as they helped Marco into the middle SUV, completely off books. Staff that knows how to treat gunshot wounds without calling the cops. Elena climbed in beside Marco, refusing to let go of his hand. Dr. Reeves worked in, the moving vehicle, cutting away Marco's blood-soaked shirt to reveal the full extent of the damage. 2 bullets in the shoulder, 1 still lodged inside. The graze on his side. Multiple contusions and what looked like burns from the explosions. How bad? Elena asked. Bad enough, Dr. Reeves said honestly, but survivable. He was lucky if that bullet in his shoulder was 3 inches to the left. It would have hit his subclavian artery. He'd have bled out in minutes. Lucky, Elena repeated hollowly. They drove through New York streets at speeds that should have attracted police attention, but somehow didn't. Tony was making calls the whole way, coordinating security, tracking Lorenzo's men, organizing what sounded like a massive retaliation. The clinic turned out to be a converted warehouse in an industrial area near the docks. From outside, it looked abandoned. Inside, it was a fully equipped surgical facility, clean and professional and completely illegal. A team of medical, staff nurses, an anesthesiologist, 2 more doctors moved with practiced efficiency. They had Marco on a gurney and prepped for surgery in minutes. Mrs. Rossi, one of the doctors said gently, you'll need to wait outside. We'll take good care of him. I'm not leaving him, Elena said firmly. Mama. Marco's hand found hers, his grip weak. Let them work. Go with Tony. He'll keep you safe. You're my son, and you're my mother, which means you do what I say for once. Marco managed a small smile. Please, Mama. I can't focus on getting better if I'm worried about you watching them dig bullets out of me. Elena wanted to argue, but the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her, made her relent. She squeezed his hand once, hard, then let the doctors wheel him away. The waiting room was small, with uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lighting that buzzed like angry wasps. Tony sat across from her, his phone constantly buzzing with updates. Angela had disappeared, somewhere getting her own head wound treated, probably. You did good tonight, Tony said after a long silence. Staying calm, helping the boss. Not many people can handle that kind of violence without falling apart. I raised a son alone in a bad neighborhood, Elena said. I've dealt with violence before, just never on this scale. This scale is different. Tony set down his phone. Mrs. Rossi, I need you to understand something. What happened tonight, that's not unusual in our world. That's just Tuesday. Your son lives with the constant threat of death. We all do. It's the price of power. That's a hell of a price. It is. But it's also a reality. Tony leaned forward. The boss made choices that brought him here. Some good, some terrible. But he made them for reasons that mattered to him. And the biggest reason? Tony met her eyes. Was making sure his mother would never have to scrub another floor. that she'd never have to choose between medicine and rent, that she'd be safe and comfortable for the rest of her life. So I should feel grateful? Elena's voice was sharp. My son nearly died tonight because of choices he made to protect me. How is that better than me cleaning houses? Because you're alive. Because he's alive. Because in this world, being alive and together is the best outcome you can hope for. Tony's phone buzzed again. He checked it, and his expression darkened. We found the 4 men who escaped. 2 are dead, 2 are in custody. And Lorenzo? Back in his compound, surrounded by security, unreachable for now. Tony stood. But that won't last. The boss will go after him. After what happened tonight, there's no other option. This is war now, Mrs. Rossi. Total war. And it won't end until one of them is dead. Elena absorbed this. Her son was in surgery because of a war over territory and pride and power. More men would die. Maybe Marco would be one of them. Maybe she would be. All because 8 years ago, a young man had decided the only way to protect his mother was to become a monster. There has to be another way. Elena said quietly. There has to be something other than endless violence. If there is, we haven't found it yet. They waited for 3 hours. Elena paced, sat, paced again. She tried not to think about Marco on an operating table, doctors digging bullets out of his flesh. Tried not to think about the men who died tonight, both Marco's and Lorenzo's, who all had mothers somewhere wondering why their sons didn't call. Tried not to think about what came next. Finally, a doctor emerged, still in surgical scrubs, pulling off bloody gloves. He's stable, the doctor said before Elena could ask. We removed the bullet, repaired the damage. He'll need extensive recovery time, those shoulder wounds are serious. But he'll live. Elena's legs gave out. Tony caught her, guided her back to a chair. Can I see him? She asked. He's in recovery, still under anesthesia. But yes, you can sit with him. They led her to a small private room where Marco lay connected to monitors and IV lines. His shoulder was heavily bandaged, his face pale against white sheets. But his chest rose and fell steadily, and the monitors showed a strong heartbeat. Elena pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand carefully, avoiding the IV line. You stupid, brave boy, she whispered. What am I going to do with you? Marco didn't answer. Just kept breathing, kept living, kept fighting even in unconsciousness. Elena sat with him through the night, watching dawn break through the small window, painting the room in shades of pink and gold. Outside, New York woke up to another day. People going to work, drinking coffee, living normal lives. Inside this secret clinic, a Mafia boss recovered from gunshot wounds while his mother held his hand and tried to figure out how to save him from himself. Because Tony was wrong, there had to be another way. Some option other than endless war and violence and death. Elena just had to find it, before Lorenzo Moretti found them first. Marco woke on the 3rd day. Elena had barely left his side, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, eating meals Tony brought her, watching the monitors like they held the secrets of the universe. The doctor said he was healing well, no infection, no complications, strong vital signs. But he'd lost a lot of blood and his body needed time to rebuild. When his eyes finally opened, Elena was dozing, her head resting on the edge of his bed. Mama. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but it jerked Elena awake instantly. Marco. She sat up, touching his face gently. How do you feel? Like I got shot twice and blown up. He managed a weak smile. So, not great. How long was I out? 3 days. The doctors said you needed rest to heal. 3 days. Marco tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, his face contorting with pain. Damn. Lorenzo's had 3 days to prepare, to fortify, to 2-0. Elena interrupted firmly. You're not going anywhere until you're healed. Mama, I don't have time to heal. Every day I'm in here. Lorenzo gets stronger. He'll interpret my absence as weakness, use it to expand his operations, maybe even attack again. Tony's handling it. Marco stared at her. Tony's handling it how? Come see for yourself. Elena helped him sit up carefully, mindful of his shoulder. She wheeled a chair close and helped him transfer from the bed, a painful, slow process that left Marco sweating and breathing hard. But he was upright, mobile, alive. They made their way slowly to a room down the hall that Elena had discovered on day 2. Tony called it the Operations Center, a converted office space filled with computers, maps, and several of Marco's key people coordinating response to the attack. Tony looked up as they entered, his face registering surprise and something like admiration. "Boss, you should be resting." "I've been resting for 3 days." Marco lowered himself carefully into a chair, wincing. "Update, everything." Tony pulled up a map of New York on the main monitor. "After the attack, we locked down all our operations. Doubled security everywhere. I've had teams working around the clock to identify how Lorenzo's men got into your building. And Dennis Caruso. The guy we thought was just stealing money? He'd been feeding Lorenzo intelligence for months, building layouts, security protocols, staff schedules. He gave them everything they needed to breach your penthouse." Marco's jaw clenched. "I thought you said you took care of Dennis." "We did. He's dead. But the damage was already done." Tony pulled up another screen showing financial records. "We've also been tracking Lorenzo's money. Turns out he's overextended. The attack on you cost him almost $2 million in bribes and resources. He's vulnerable right now." "So we hit him," Marco said immediately. "Boss, you can barely walk." "I don't need to walk to plan an operation." Marco leaned forward despite the pain. "Show me Lorenzo's holdings. Where's he weakest?" Elena watched her son transform back into the cold strategist she'd seen glimpses of. The boy who'd woken confused and hurting disappeared, replaced by the calculating boss who'd built an empire. "His waterfront operations," Tony said, highlighting an area on the map. 3 warehouses in Red Hook. That's where he moves most of his product. We hit those. We cripple his cash flow. Security? Heavy, but manageable with the right approach. Tony pulled up surveillance photos. "We've been monitoring for 2 days. Identified weak points in their perimeter. Good. Assemble 2 teams. One for the primary assault, one for extraction and cleanup." Marco was all business now. "I want this done fast and clean. In and out before." "No." Everyone turned to look at Elena. "No?" Marco repeated, confused. "No more attacks. No more violence." Elena stood, moving to stand beside her son. "This stops now. Mama, Lorenzo tried to kill us. I can't just let that go. I'm not asking you to let it go. I'm asking you to find another way." Elena looked around the room at the gathered men soldiers, all of them, who'd spent their lives following orders and killing enemies. "How many of you have families?" Silence. Then, slowly, hands raised. Almost everyone. Mothers, wives, children, more hands. "And how many of you want those families to live in constant fear that you won't come home? That you'll die in some warehouse firefight over territory and pride?" The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Mrs. Rossi," Tony said carefully. "With respect, this is how our world works. Someone attacks us, we hit back harder. It's the only thing that maintains order." "Order?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "You call this order? My son nearly died 3 days ago. 6 of your men are dead. Lorenzo's lost 11. And for what? So you can control a few more blocks? Move a few more drugs?" "Mama," Marco started, but Elena wasn't finished. "I've spent 3 days watching you all plan revenge, tracking Lorenzo's movements, identifying targets. And not once has anyone suggested maybe there's a better way. Maybe endless violence isn't the only option." "Because there isn't another option," Marco said tiredly. "This is the life, Mama. You're either the predator or the prey. There's no middle ground. Then create one." Elena turned to face him fully. "You're powerful, Marco. You have resources, connections, leverage. Use them for something other than killing." "Like what? Call Lorenzo and ask nicely for peace?" Marco shook his head. "He tried to kill you. There's no coming back from that. So you kill him, and then what? His second in command takes over and comes after you for revenge? And then you kill him, and someone else takes over, and the cycle continues forever?" Elena's voice rose. "When does it end, Marco? When does someone finally say enough?" The room was silent. Elena could see her words hitting home not just with Marco, but with the others. These men who'd spent years fighting, who'd seen friends die and killed enemies and never questioned whether there might be another way. "I don't know how to stop," Marco admitted quietly. "I've been fighting so long I don't know how to do anything else." "Then learn." Elena took his hand gently. "Because baby, if you keep going down this path, one of two things happens. Either you die in some fight like tonight, or you live long enough to become so hardened that the boy I raised disappears completely. Either way, I lose you." Marco looked at their joined hands. His mother's, weathered from years of work, scarred from cleaning chemicals and hard living. His, marked with violence, stained with blood that would never fully wash away. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "Talk to him. To Lorenzo." Elena squeezed his hand. "Not to surrender, not to show weakness, but to negotiate. Find out what he actually wants. Because I'm betting it's not a war that destroys you both. It's territory, money, respect. Things that can be negotiated. Mama, men like Lorenzo don't negotiate. Men like Lorenzo respond to strength. And you know what takes more strength than violence?" Elena met his eyes. "Having the power to destroy someone and choosing not to. That's real power, Marco. Not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from respect." Tony cleared his throat. "Boss, if I may, she's not entirely wrong. War is expensive, in men and money. If there's a way to end this without total destruction of one side or the other, it might be worth exploring." "You're seriously suggesting I negotiate with the man who tried to kill my mother?" "I'm suggesting you explore all options before committing to a war that could cost us everything." Tony pulled up financial projections. "A prolonged conflict with Lorenzo costs us an estimated 10 to 15 million, not counting casualties. If we can avoid that cost through negotiation, even negotiation we go into planning to break, we come out ahead." Marco studied the numbers, the maps, the evidence of how much a war would cost. Elena watched him calculate, strategize, work through scenarios in his head. "If I do this," Marco said slowly, "if I reach out to Lorenzo, it can't look like weakness. It has to look like strength, like I'm offering him a chance to avoid annihilation." "Which is true," Elena said. "You could destroy him, but you're choosing not to because the cost is too high. He'll think it's a trap. Probably. So we make it impossible for it to be a trap." Elena had been thinking about this for 3 days. Neutral ground, public place, no weapons, no guards except minimal security for both sides. A conversation between two businessmen, not two warlords. And if he refuses? If he sees this as weakness and attacks anyway? Then you tried peace first. Elena's voice was firm. And when you go to war, you do it knowing you exhausted every other option. Your men will respect that. The other families will respect that. And maybe, just maybe, your mother will be able to sleep at night knowing her son at least tried to be better. Marco was quiet for a long time. Everyone in the room waited, watched him work through the decision that would determine the course of the next weeks, months, maybe years. "Tony," Marco finally said, "set up a meeting. Neutral ground. Tell Lorenzo I want to discuss terms of peace. But make it clear if he comes to this meeting planning violence. I'll burn his entire operation to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." Tony nodded and pulled out his phone. "This is either the smartest thing I've ever done," Marco said to Elena, "or the dumbest. Time will tell which. Either way, you're trying." Elena touched his face gently. "That's all I'm asking." The meeting was set for 3 days later in a restaurant called Bellini's in Little Italy. Neutral ground, family-owned, respected by all the families as a place where business could be discussed without bloodshed. Both sides would bring minimal security, 2 men each, and no weapons would be allowed inside the restaurant. Marco spent those 3 days healing and preparing. Elena watched him transform from the wounded man in the hospital bed to something approaching the powerful boss she'd seen glimpses of. He moved carefully, his shoulder still healing, but his mind was sharp as ever. On the day of the meeting, Elena helped him dress. A dark suit that cost more than she used to make in a month. A silk shirt that hid his bandages. Cufflinks that had been his father's. He looked every inch the powerful crime boss. Dangerous, controlled, intimidating. "You don't have to do this," Elena said as he checked his reflection one final time. "We can call it off. Go back to planning the war." "No, you were right, Mama, about all of it." Marco turned to face her. "I've been fighting so long I forgot there might be another way. Time to see if I'm as smart as I think I am. If I can win with words instead of bullets. And if you can't? Then we find out if my shoulder's healed enough for me to shoot straight." Tony drove them to Bellini's in an armored SUV. Angela rode shotgun, alert despite the healing wound on her forehead. Behind them, another vehicle followed at a discreet distance backup, just in case things went wrong. The restaurant was closed for the day, cleared specifically for this meeting. Elena could see people watching from neighboring buildings. Lorenzo's men, probably, making sure their boss wasn't walking into a trap. Marco's people would be doing the same. "Last chance to change your mind," Tony said as they pulled up to the curb. "I'm not changing my mind." Marco opened his door carefully. "But Tony? If this goes sideways, get my mother out first. That's your only priority. Understood, boss? Understood? Understood." Marco helped Elena out of the SUV. She'd insisted on coming, despite everyone's protests. If they were going to talk peace, having his mother present would send a message this wasn't just business, it was personal. Family. They walked into Bellini's together. The restaurant was elegant, old-world Italian with dark wood and white tablecloths and the smell of garlic and red wine in the air. At a table in the center of the room sat Lorenzo Moretti. He was younger than Elena expected. Early 30s, handsome in a cruel way, with slicked-back black hair and a suit that probably cost as much as Marco's. He stood as they entered, his 2 guards flanking him. "Marco Rossi." Lorenzo's voice was smooth, cultured. "I was surprised to get your call." "I'm sure you were." Marco moved to the table, his posture careful to hide his injury. "Lorenzo Moretti. We finally meet in person." "Indeed. And this must be the famous Elena Rossi." Lorenzo's eyes found Elena, and she saw calculation in them. Assessment. "The woman whose safety nearly cost your son his life." "The woman whose safety is worth more than your entire operation," Marco replied coldly. "Sit. We have business to discuss." They sat Marco and Elena on one side, Lorenzo and his guards on the other. The owner of Bellini's appeared with wine and antipasto, set it down, and disappeared. Neutral ground meant neutral service. "You wanted to talk peace," Lorenzo said, pouring wine for himself. "I'm listening. You attacked my home, killed 6 of my men, threatened my mother." Marco's voice was controlled, but Elena could hear the rage underneath. "Give me one reason I shouldn't destroy everything you've built. Because it would cost you everything you've built in the process." Lorenzo sipped his wine. "We're evenly matched, Marco. You know it, I know it. A war between us would be devastating for both sides. So why start one? I didn't start anything. I made a move for territory I believed was contested. You reacted with disproportionate force." Lorenzo leaned back. "The mother card was admittedly a miscalculation. I didn't realize how far you'd go to protect her. Now you know," Marco said flatly. "So let's discuss how we avoid mutual destruction." For the next hour, they negotiated. Territory boundaries, revenue splits, areas of cooperation versus competition. It was like watching 2 chess masters play, each move calculated, each concession balanced against a gain somewhere else. Elena sat quietly, watching her son prove that he was more than just muscle and violence. He was smart, strategic, capable of reading his opponent and adjusting tactics on the fly. This was what had made him powerful, not just his willingness to kill, but his intelligence in knowing when not to. "The waterfront warehouses stay mine," Lorenzo said firmly. "That's non-negotiable." "Fine. But I want the distribution routes through Queens and the Bronx," Marco countered. "You keep the docks. I control how product moves through my territory, which gives you leverage to choke my operations anytime you want, which gives both of us reason to maintain peace." Marco leaned forward. "You need my routes. I need your ports. We're forced into cooperation instead of competition." Lorenzo considered this. "And enforcement? When someone violates the boundaries we set?" Joint response. "Neither of us moves against violators without consulting the other first." Marco pulled out a document he'd come prepared. Elena realized. "I've drafted terms. Territory divisions, revenue splits, conflict resolution procedures. Think of it as a business partnership with defined roles." Lorenzo took the document and read through it carefully. Elena watched his face, trying to read his reaction. Surprise, definitely. Possibly respect. These men had been trying to kill each other a week ago, and now they were drafting business contracts. "This is more detailed than I expected," Lorenzo admitted. "You've thought this through. My mother convinced me. That endless war was bad for business." Marco glanced at Elena. "Turns out she was right. We can both be successful without destroying each other. The question is whether you're smart enough to see it." It was a calculated insult. A test. Elena held her breath. Lorenzo smiled. Smart enough to know when I'm beat. Your intel is better than mine. You knew about Dennis when you should have been vulnerable. Your security is tighter. My men barely made it into your building before your people responded. And your recovery time is impressive, 3 days from gunshot wounds to negotiating table. He set down the document. You're offering me a way to save face while avoiding a war I'd probably lose. I'd be an idiot to refuse. So, we have a deal? We have a framework for a deal. These terms need to be reviewed by my people, adjusted where necessary. But the core concept? Partnership instead of war? Lorenzo extended his hand across the table. Yes, we have a deal. Marco shook his hand. Elena watched the two men, rivals, enemies, almost killers, seal an agreement that could reshape New York's underworld. One condition, Lorenzo added. Your mother's safety remains your concern, not mine. But if any of my people even look at her wrong, I'll handle it personally. Consider her under my protection as well as yours. It was a gesture of respect. An acknowledgement that Elena wasn't just collateral, but the force that had made this peace possible. Agreed, Marco said. They finished the meeting with more wine, more negotiation of details, planning for how to present this alliance to their respective organizations. When they finally left Bellini's 2 hours later, Marco looked exhausted but satisfied. Did we just end a war? Elena asked as Tony drove them home. We postponed it, Marco corrected. This peace will last as long as both sides see more benefit in cooperation than conflict. Could be years, could be months. But you tried. You chose negotiation over violence, because you made me see there was another option. Marco took her hand. I'm not reformed, Mama. I'm still everything I was before. But maybe, with you here, I can be something slightly better. Make choices that lead to less blood instead of more. That's all I'm asking for, Elena said. Progress, not perfection. That night, back in a new safe house, the penthouse was being repaired and fortified. Elena sat with Marco on the balcony overlooking the city. They drank tea, watched lights flicker in windows where normal people lived normal lives, and didn't talk about anything important. Just a mother and son, finding their way back to each other through the minefield of the life he'd built. It wasn't perfect. The violence hadn't ended, it never would, not completely. Marco was still a criminal, still dangerous, still made his money in ways Elena couldn't condone. But he was trying, and sometimes, Elena thought, that was enough. For now at least, they were both alive, both together, both fighting to be better than their worst moments. And in the world Marco inhabited, that was as close to a happy ending as anyone could hope for. 6 months passed, like a careful exhale. The peace with Lorenzo held. There were tensions, of course, small violations of territory that required joint meetings to resolve, occasional disputes about revenue splits that needed negotiation. But no more attacks, no more bodies, no more 3 calls telling Elena her son had been shot. Marco healed. His shoulder recovered slowly, requiring physical therapy and leaving scars that he wore like lessons. He moved through his world with slightly less violence, slightly more calculation. The reputation shift was subtle, but real people started calling him the diplomat behind his back, which he pretended to hate, but Elena suspected he was secretly proud of. Elena had settled into her new role. She managed the flower shop 3 days a week, real work, not make work. Maria, the previous manager, had been hesitant at first, but quickly warmed when she realized Elena actually knew what she was doing. The shop thrived under their joint management, became a hub for the neighborhood, a place where people felt welcome. On Saturdays, Elena taught a cooking class in the back room. Former housewives, young mothers, a few of Marco's men who wanted to learn family recipes from the old country. It reminded her of the community she'd had years ago, before poverty had isolated her, before exhaustion had made friendship impossible. She still lived in the penthouse, a newly renovated, even more secure version of the one that had been attacked. But it felt less like a fortress now, more like a home. She'd added personal touches. Photos on the walls, her mother's quilt on the couch, the spider plant from her old apartment, thriving now in the abundant sunlight and expensive planters. Marco visited often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit quietly in her living room and pretend for a few hours that he was a normal son with a normal life. On a warm October evening, almost exactly 1 year after Elena had broken the vase in Victoria Blackwell's mansion, she stood in her kitchen preparing Sunday dinner. Marco had promised to come. And for once, he'd be on time, no emergencies, no meetings, just dinner with his mother. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m. Elena opened it to find Marco holding flowers, expensive, beautiful arrangements from his shop, and accompanied by a woman. "Mama," Marco said, that slightly nervous smile on his face that Elena remembered from when he was a boy introducing his first girlfriend. "There's someone I want you to meet. This is Isabella." Isabella, my mother, Elena Rossi. Isabella was beautiful. Early 30s, with kind eyes and a smile that seemed genuine. She wore a simple dress and carried a bottle of wine, and when she looked at Marco, Elena saw something that made her breath catch. Love. Real, uncomplicated. Love. "Mrs. Rossi," Isabella said, her voice warm. "Marco has told me so much about you. It's an honor to finally meet you." "Come in," Elena said, stepping aside. "Both of you. Dinner's almost ready." They settled into her living room. Marco looked more relaxed than Elena had seen him in months. Isabella clearly knew about his work. She didn't flinch when the conversation touched on business, or when Tony called to brief Marco on something. She just smiled and sipped her wine and talked to Elena about books and cooking and normal things that made the evening feel almost domestic. "How did you two meet?" Elena asked over dinner. "She teaches second grade at a school in Brooklyn," Marco said, his voice soft with something that might have been pride. "We met when I was donating computers to her classroom, part of the community outreach program Tony's been running." "Community outreach?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Legitimate philanthropy," Marco clarified quickly. "Actual good deeds. She doesn't know everything about what I do." "I know enough," Isabella interrupted gently, touching his hand. "I know you're complicated. I know you've done things you're not proud of, but I also know you're trying to be better. That's what matters to me." Elena watched them together, her dangerous son and this gentle schoolteacher, and saw a future she'd stopped letting herself imagine. Marco, settled, happy, maybe even redeemed, in his own way. "She makes me want to be better," Marco said quietly after Isabella excused herself to the bathroom. "Not just for you, Mama. For her. For myself. For the life I might actually get to have instead of just fighting to survive." "Then hold on to her," Elena said, "and keep trying. Every day, keep trying." After dinner, they sat on the balcony drinking coffee and watching the city lights. Isabella told stories about her students that made Marco really laugh. Not the harsh sound Elena had heard before, but genuine joy. "Did Marco tell you about the deal we made?" Isabella asked Elena. "What deal?" "If we get married," Isabella's cheeks colored slightly, "and I'm not saying we will, but if we do, Marco has to get out, completely out of the life. Go legitimate, use his business skills for actual legal enterprises. No more violence, no more territory wars, just a normal life." Elena looked at her son. "And you agreed to this?" "I did." Marco's hand found Isabella's. "I don't know if I can do it. Don't know if I'm capable of being normal. But I want to try. For her, for you. For whatever kids we might have someday who deserve better than growing up with a criminal for a father." Tears pricked Elena's eyes. "Your father would be so proud of you right now. Papa would probably be horrified by everything I've done. Maybe, but he'd also be proud that you're trying to be better. That you're choosing love over power." Elena raised her coffee cup in a toast. To second chances, and to the women stubborn enough to believe in them. They clinked cups, three people bound together by the strange mathematics of redemption, the mother who'd never stopped believing, the son who'd finally started trying, and the teacher who'd seen past the monster to the man underneath. Later, after Isabella and Marco left, Elena stood on her balcony alone. She thought about where she'd been a year ago, desperate, powerless, about to sign away years of her life over a broken vase. She thought about where Marco had been isolated, violent, convinced that power required constant brutality, and she thought about where they were now. Not perfect, not clean, but together, fighting to be better, making choices that led toward light instead of deeper darkness. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marco. "Thank you for tonight, and for not giving up on me." "I love you, Mama." Elena smiled, typed back. "I love you too, baby. Always have, always will." Below her, New York City hummed with life. Millions of people living their complicated, messy, beautiful lives. Some of them criminals, some of them saints, most of them somewhere in between. Elena had learned something this year, something important. People weren't binary. They weren't monsters or angels, good or evil. They were complicated collections of choices, some terrible, some heroic, most somewhere in the middle. Her son had made terrible choices, had blood on his hands that would never fully wash away, but he was also trying to be better, trying to build something good from the ashes of what he'd been. And that was worth fighting for, worth believing in. Because at the end of the day, that's what mothers did. They believed in their children, even when the world had given up on them. They fought for redemption even when it seemed impossible. They held on to love even when violence threatened to drown everything else. Elena Rossi had cleaned houses for powerful people her whole life, had been invisible, disposable, forgotten, but she'd raised a son who'd become powerful enough to change his world. And then she'd been powerful enough to change him right back. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. And sometimes, Elena thought as she headed back inside to her beautiful, safe home, enough was exactly right. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.